And if I could ask one of the Democratic Services team to please let me know once that's actually coming through on the live feed on the YouTube channel.
Yeah, just checking now, Owen.
Owen, a check from me that you've got the slides that just being completed to give some heads up to the collective audience.
Yes, Councillor King. Paul Cook sent those through, and Richard will be displaying those at the absolute moment.
Lovely.
You're good to go, Owen. You're streaming.
That's lovely. Thank you, Richard. So good evening, councillors. Good evening, colleagues, and good evening, members of the public who are tuning in via the council's YouTube channel to the Scrutiny Panel meeting tonight. First order of the business, item 1 on the agenda is for election of the chairman for the remaining municipal year. So what I'll do is ask members of the panel to please give your nominations to that position. Each nomination will have to have a seconder, and we will then go to vote on the nominations made. If there are more than one nomination made, then we'll tackle each nomination in the chronological order that it's made. So if I may ask councillors to please submit nominations.
Could I nominate Councillor Kevin Bentley, please?
Thank you, Councillor Dundas. We have a nomination for Councillor Kevin Bentley. Do I have a seconder?
I'll second Councillor Kevin Bentley.
Councillor Barber, thank you. That's a second. Do we have any further nominations? I take silence that we have no further nominations, so we will proceed to the vote to appoint Councillor Kevin Bentley as chairman of the panel for the remainder of the municipal year. So I'm going to read through members of the panel's names in order, and please cast your vote for, against, or to abstain. So starting off, Councillor Barber.
For.
Councillor Barber, for. Councillor Bentley.
For.
Councillor Bentley, for. Councillor Bourne.
For.
Councillor Bourne, for. Councillor Dundas.
For.
Councillor Dundas, for. Councillor Hayter.
For.
Councillor Hayter, for. Councillor Hogg.
For.
Councillor Hogg, for. Councillor McCarthy.
For.
Councillor McCarthy, for. Councillor Whitehead.
For.
Councillor Whitehead, for. I make that a unanimous vote to appoint Councillor Bentley as chairman of the panel, and I shall now pass on to him for the second item of the evening. Many thanks.
Owen, thank you very much indeed, and indeed, colleagues, thank you very much indeed for your vote of confidence. I hope to serve you well as chairman for the rest of the municipal year. Now, it wasn't on the agenda because it'd been very presumptive to have it on the agenda, but of course, with my elevation to the chairmanship now, we have a role spare for the deputy chair. And therefore, I'd like to move to nominations for the role of deputy chair for the same procedure we had for my election. So are there any nominations for deputy chair, please?
I'd like to nominate Councillor Lewis Barber, please.
Okay, is there a seconder, please?
Yeah, I'll second that for Councillor Barber.
Are there any other nominations, please, colleagues? No, in which case let's move to the vote. The first person is Councillor Barber himself.
For.
For. I'm a for as well. Councillor Bourne.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Dundas.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Hayter.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Hogg.
For.
Thank you. Councillor McCarthy.
For.
And Councillor Whitehead.
For.
Thank you. That, I believe, is a unanimous vote. I'll just confirm with Owen.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, unanimous vote to approve.
Thank you, Richard, indeed, in which case Councillor Lewis Barber then is the Deputy Chair of the Scrutiny Panel for the rest of the municipal year. Thank you. We'll move on to item 2, which is welcome announcements. And I just want to formally welcome everyone to the meeting as the Chair of Scrutiny now. And it's, of course, an online meeting. We're meeting on the 7th of July 2020. And my name is Councillor Kevin Bentley, as you've heard, and I'm the Councillor for the Marks Tate and Lay Award. And I'll be chairing the meeting for the rest of the evening. I'll ask the other panel members to formally introduce themselves in just a moment. This meeting is being broadcast live via Zoom over the internet and on the Council's YouTube channel, and will also be available to watch afterwards. There's a couple of housekeeping points I want to mention. I think you're all been very good and done this, but with the exception of Democratic Services officers, can I ask you all to put yourself onto mute and only come on live to talk when I invite you to do so as part of the meeting, please. And everyone on the panel will get a chance to speak. I'll probably change the order a bit just for the sake of moving it around, but everyone will get a chance to speak on the item if they wish. I would ask for each item of business to be presented and then ask each member of the panel in turn if they wish to speak, as I've just said, or ask a question or comment. At the end of each item of business, I'll ask each panel member in turn to confirm audibly how they wish to vote if we get to the stage of having votes. And of course, it will follow the procedure we had just a moment ago. If we are still going by 7:30, I will check with you if you'd like to have a break at that point, and we can take one then or at another time if you wish. Let us move around then to the panel members so they can introduce themselves with their name and which ward they represent. So Councillor Barber, please.
Councillor Lewis Barber, Lexington and Braeswood Ward.
Thank you. I've already given my name as Councillor Kevin Bentley, so may we move to Councillor Bourne, please.
Councillor Tina Bourne, good evening. Labour member for Greenstead Ward.
Thank you. Councillor Dundas.
Councillor Paul Dundas, Stanway Ward.
And Councillor Hayter.
Councillor Chris Hayter, St John's, St Anne's Ward.
Thank you. Councillor Hogg.
Councillor Mike Hogg, Councillor for St Anne's and St John's Wards.
Thank you. Councillor McCarthy.
Thank you. I'm Councillor Sam McCarthy and I represent Shrub End Ward.
And Councillor Whitehead.
Councillor Lorcan Whitehead, representing Newtown and Christchurch Ward.
Thank you. Thanks very much indeed. We should also perhaps formally note that Councillor Barber, who now is the Deputy Chair, has in fact been appointed to the Scrutiny Panel as a result of the resignation from the Council of former Chair, Councillor Davis. Item number 3, I don't believe there are any substitutions from what I've heard and seen. Item 4, there are no urgent matters. Item 5, any declarations of interest, colleagues? Let me go round to everyone again. Councillor Barber?
No, none. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Bourne?
None.
Thank you. Councillor Dundas?
None that I'm aware of.
Thank you. Councillor Hayter?
None.
Thank you. Councillor Hogg?
None that I'm aware of, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor McCarthy?
No, none from me.
Thank you. And Councillor Whitehead?
None from me.
Thank you. I know we don't always have to do this, but I will declare the interest that I'm a county councillor for Essex in case that comes up in conversation. I'd just like to make sure that that's cleared off. And of course, if any member feels they have an interest as we go through the meeting, then please just indicate. I should also say we have a number of visiting councillors. I'll ask them to introduce themselves when we get to that section of the meeting. Item 6, the minutes. Can I ask each member in turn if they have any notes on the minutes they wish to change? We'll do that first and then we'll take the vote. So can I quickly go through if you have any amendments you wish to make to the minutes? So Councillor Barber?
I was not on the panel, so no.
Of course you weren't. No, big one. No, you was visiting quite a lot there. It felt like it. Right, Councillor Bourne?
No, thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Dundas.
I'm happy with them, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Hayter.
Absolutely fine.
Thank you, Councillor Hogg.
Can I query, Chairman? Sam McCarthy is not on the minutes of the 1st of June. I'm sure he was present. Maybe he will tell us he wasn't present, but I'm sure he was. Could we check that out as to whether he was or was not actually attending the meeting?
Yes. Let's ask him. Councillor McCarthy, were you there last time?
I believe so. Yes, I was. Yeah. I was going to query the same thing.
Oh, lovely. Okay, so I think Owen has picked that up. We'll make sure that amendment is put in.
Thank you.
Well done.
On that basis, though, Councillor Hogg, your amendments?
I'm happy with the minutes, other than that alteration.
I'll come round to the whether happy, just the amendments at the moment. Councillor McCarthy?
No, thank you to my group spokesperson for pointing that out. I was going to say
Yes.
so. Otherwise,
Yes.
all good.
And Councillor Whitehead?
Happy with them, thanks.
Thank you. Right, I will just formally go through and ask you just a quick yes or no if you confirm there are true and accurate record with that amendment. So, and I'm content as well. So, Councillor Barber?
No comment again.
Thank you, Councillor Bourne.
Agreed.
Thank you, Councillor Dundas.
Agreed.
Thank you, Councillor Hayter.
Agreed.
Thank you, Councillor Whitehead. Oh, sorry, I beg your pardon, Councillor Hogg.
Thank you, Chairman. Agreed.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy.
Agreed.
And Councillor Whitehead.
Agreed.
Thank you. I will change the order later on, so Councillor White isn't always last on the list when we come to that. Right, okay. We'll then move on to item 7, the general have your say. There are no speakers on the general have your say that I'm aware of, unless that's changed. Owen, can you just confirm, please?
No change, Councillor.
Thank you. All the other speakers are on item 11. We'll take those speakers. Item 8, decisions taken under special urgency provision. There are none. Number 9, cabinet or portfolio holder decisions called in for review. There are none. Items 10A and B, items requested by members of the panel and other members. There are none. So we now move on to the substantive item on the agenda, which is item 11, which is the Council's response to coronavirus COVID-19. And I personally like to thank the administration for asking us to pre-scrutiny this, scrutinise this, albeit 24 hours ahead of when it's actually going to be talked about in Cabinet. But nonetheless, I understand it's been done very quickly, and therefore the opportunity to pre-scrutinise, I think, is a good move. We do have your says. We do have written submissions. Before I go to those, have we got Mr. Hagan yet?
Yes, Councillor. Mr. Hagan should be on this meeting. Mr. Hagan, if you could activate your video and audio stream, please.
Hi there, everyone. How are you?
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Hagan. We've got 3 written submissions. I'm just going to take those first, which the officer will read out, note, and then I'll come to you for your 3 minutes, and I'll explain the rules when we get to that stage. On that basis, Owen, can I ask you please to read the 3 submissions and who they are from, please?
Yes, of course, Mr. Chairman. So the first written submission is from Mr. Andy Hamilton, and he writes, I cannot see why residents do not compost their garden waste and use it to improve their garden soil. In the past, I used the tapered compost bins, but now dig a trench and overfill it during the year. Each year I start a new trench, putting some soil in planters and the rest on top of last year's compost heap. The vegetable patch has turned from lifeless, dry orange soil to dark soil that retains the moisture. So that's the first submission.
Thank you.
Second submission was from Miss Pippa Salmon, and she writes, I'm very upset about the proposal as it's not based on ability to pay. For example, I expect to be on a low income at the time and will struggle to find the extra money. It's effectively a council tax increase without regard to means. I'm also worried it will lead to an increase in bonfires, whether or not they're legal, as well as fly tipping. And this ends.
Thank you.
So the third and final submission was from Ms. Maxine Strugnell, and she writes, what if 75 to 80% of households do not take up the offer and instead either fly tipping it or sticking it in the general waste bin? Would this not increase the costs of the council? You've introduced free wheelie bins in some areas, so would be discriminating against the areas you have not issued them yet. I currently have to pay for my black bags, so they are benefiting more than me already without charging us for the wheelie bin. Please do not say they elected to back in 2016, as I wanted them back then too. Are you taking them back or charging more to cover the cost of the wheelie bin for those who already have brown wheelie bins? Does the council not make money from the compost it creates from the garden, from the green recycling? That ends.
Lovely. Thank you very much indeed. Just before I go to Mr. Hagan, can I just ask officers representing cabinet members perhaps to respond to those during your presentations? But with Mr. Hagan, because he's here, panel members only at this stage can ask a question if they wish, and then he has the right to, for 1 minute, to respond to that. But again, his comments, if I could ask the presenting officers and cabinet members to pick up the comments within their presentation, rather than keep batting backwards and forwards. Okay. Mr. Hagan, I think you've done this before, but you have 3 minutes. There is a bell after 2 minutes and a bell at 3 minutes. Can I ask you please to stick to that time if you possibly can? I am a little bit generous. If I think you're winding up and we've hit 3 minutes, I'll let you carry on. Otherwise, I'll stop you. And just for the sake of regularity, because this is the first time the bell's been out, I think, on a scrutiny meeting virtually, can we just hear the bells? We all know what it sounds like, Owen. Yeah, can't hear it. That's why I wanted to test it. You have another go?
Ominous.
Got it. Lovely. Thank you. Just so you can hear it, so we don't miss it. Right. Okay.
I'll give it some welly, Mr. Chairman.
Sorry, say again?
I'll give it some welly, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, I think that's the answer. Right. Mr. Hagan, then, the 3 minutes starts when you do.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening all. In a recent announcement by Colchester Council to propose to start charging for garden waste collections across the borough, this has raised uncertainty in the way the waste and recycling portfolio is being managed. Residents have raised valid concerns of how proposed changes to their garden waste collections, and in particular, how these changes will affect those on low or limited incomes or those who lack the means to dispose of garden waste at their local recycling centre. With an additional cost of £25 being levied to each household for those who want to take up this service to cover the cost of the additional wheelie bin or their first, depending on where you live in the borough, are there simply no options available for households to continue to use their white sacks? It seems such a waste. Has the cost for vehicles updates to be accommodated wheelie bins even been considered? The proposals for Colchester Council Garden Waste Collection Service seemingly suggest this will be operated as a separate revenue stream at £50 per household per year, in addition to the cost of the wheelie bin. I ask the question, should the proposed new garden waste collection service perhaps be subject to a tender process? Today, I'm reaching out to the administration to raise some vital questions surrounding the proposals, hopefully with a view of receiving some answers on behalf of some residents. One local resident asks, other councils have suspended their green waste collections during the winter months to reduce costs. Why not explore alternatives rather than charging households extra when the council tax will inevitably rise next year? I think it's a good question. Another local resident has raised a valid concern over the potential increased risk of fly tipping and additional queues at the recycling centre. Some additional questions also raised, include, will we see a reduction in council tax when the service comes into operation? And one last one, will this be a weekly collection service? It is uncertain at this time if a household can opt in and opt out of the service as their demand requires, or if there is a contractual element in place. If there are contractual elements in place, what is a service level agreement for the missed collections? And what will households be penalised if their wheelie bin isn't left out for collection on time? In the end, the decision to change such an important part of the waste and recycling programme should, in my opinion, be discussed by all duly elected councillors at full council, and not by any one person taking responsibility for a change to such a critical service in the town. Thank you.
Very much indeed. Would any of the panel members, I'll come round to you and name you, if you'd like to ask a question, obviously you're entitled to do so. Councillor McCarthy.
No, I have no questions for Jeremy at this moment. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hogg.
No questions.
Thank you. Councillor Whitehead.
No questions.
Thank you. Councillor Bourne.
No questions, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Hayter.
No, nothing at this time.
Thank you. Councillor Barber.
No, not at this point. Thank you.
Thank you. And Councillor Dundas.
No questions. I'm sure that there were some good issues in there. I'm sure they will be discussed this evening as we go on.
Lovely. Mr. Hagan, thank you. If you'd like to stay and listen now, because when we get to the presentations, officers are making a note of your comments as they were in the written ones, and we'll make sure that they are addressed during those presentations. We now move on to members who wish to speak. The order is the order I have as people logged in to ask if they can ask a question. So in a moment, we'll start with Councillor Leslie Scott-Buttell, then Councillor Beverly Oxford, then Councillor Sue Lissimore, then Councillor Mark Gocher, and then Councillor Lee Scaldis. You are completely untimed. If you are still going at midnight, I might just interrupt, but otherwise the floor is yours. You can speak as long as you wish. So if Councillor Scott-Buttell, you are ready, you can begin.
Thank you very much, Chair. I understand that the Minister responsible, Robert Jenrick, told councils that they would do whatever is necessary. The promise to 300 leaders was clear. We will pay you for the work you do for us. We will cover you for income lost. They didn't. To this point in time, they haven't. I understand that we can draw on reserves to help, but it only buys time. I understand that the government haven't kept their promise. They will cover part of losses and extra costs, but this year only. They are walking away without giving us the ability to borrow to pay for running costs like they can. They give us the responsibility to help rising demand with less money. Sadly, we as a local authority are not alone. These are uncertain times for all of us. A resident contacted me saying, by targeting the residents, I feel that the council is targeting the wrong people. It should be lobbying the government for more money, ultimately the taxpayer, and extra resources. Another said, we are okay as we can compost and we do understand savings have to be made, but we fear there will be a lot more fly tipping of not only rubbish, but now garden waste. At present, there are uncertain waiting times for the tip. I don't know how much influence you have on voting any, but would you please pass our comments, concerns on to those that will be voting? And that's why I'm here. I'm here to represent my residents' views to the council. That's my job. And as my residents said, I hope my comments will influence those voting tonight. There are questions in the proposal that I am waiting for answers to. I want to see evidence-based responses to points such as Colchester Borough Council at this point in time are in the minority of councils who do not charge. 65% councils charged pre-COVID. How many of the remaining 35% are now looking to charge? How is it fair to expect residents to pay for collection of leaves that end up in their gardens from highway trees? This needs to be addressed. If agreed, the changes are due to be implemented in October 2020. Has the legality of this change in an advertised agreement between the council and residents been considered? As with any product service, once stated to be included and the collection of payments commenced, this cannot be changed until the next period, being April 2021. This needs to be answered. My understanding, according to the scrutiny papers, 25% of garden waste will end up in the black wheel bins or sacks. Where is the evidence? Can you confirm how many extra tons will end up in landfill? And which landfill? What are the extra costs to landfill? This needs to be addressed. On what basis has it been decided that 12 to 50% of residents will be taking up the offer? That is a large variation and will impact on costs and savings. There has been no consultation. How can any realistic prediction be made? How does anyone know for sure who will take it up if the question hasn't been asked? These questions need to be asked. I have been asked whether a full cost benefit analysis has been undertaken on this proposal and if it can be shared with our residents. I understand that the council needs to find £1 million plus a year in savings. It is not easy and it is very serious, but it doesn't need to be from the waste service. Is there really nothing else anywhere else? What other avenues have been explored? This is a cross-party issue and too serious to play political games with. I've been told it currently costs 1.1 million to run the Green Waste Service. Included in the costs are grants and reimbursements. Are grants and reimbursements a cost to the council, money out, or again, money in? Can this be clarified, please? In addition, the green credit claim has not been factored in. If I'm correct in my understanding, the cost figure is inaccurate. I'm concerned about the option to share bins with neighbours in an attempt to keep the cost down. This could lead to problems as residents move, for example, and not knowing how many will be shared will ultimately impact on the projected figures. This needs more work. Community composting sounds great, but how would you feel if a compost heap suddenly appeared near your front door, along with the associated vehicle movements as residents stopped to unload garden waste in a residential area? It could work on allotments. However, the additional vehicle movements will again need to be considered. This concept needs more work. What concessions will be available for those on low income, the elderly, the sick, the disabled? What will the criteria be? How can a reasoned decision be made without the detail? This needs more work. We as a council signed up to the climate emergency. At the end of the report, it states there is no environmental benefit to collecting green waste. Now, all I can see is extra vehicle movements, bonfires, extra waste going to landfill and fly tipping, hardly environmentally friendly. Residents have voiced their concerns about fly tipping, extra trips to Essex County Council Recycling Centre in Shrub End, the potential increase in bonfires when we have been asking for residents to burn less due to COVID-19. They feel that the lead time in is too short for real discussion and that service is not needed in the winter. So to suggest £1 a week to join the garden club and is collected fortnightly doesn't hold water. In light of all the unanswered questions above, I ask the panel to recommend to Cabinet that this is put on hold and the extra time is granted to explore other options for funding streams. I have suggestions and I'm sure other councillors from various parties have too. In addition, extra work needs to be undertaken to see if this proposal is realistic and viable. And finally, what attempts have been made to government to honour their promise that they will cover us for income loss? Thank you.
Mr. Scott, thank you very much indeed. Lots of questions there. Can I ask Mr. Doyle and Councillor Goss, obviously, but you were making notes, I can see there, make sure those questions are answered when you come to your presentation. I suppose a lot of the panel questions are in there as well. So moving now on to Councillor Beverley Oxford, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Scrutiny, for letting me speak. I will try to be brief. COVID has brought anxiety, isolation and depression to many residents. Residents have lost loved ones and jobs or had the uncertainty of furloughing. Universal credit applications have soared. I cannot comprehend how this administration expects residents to find £25 registration fee, then £50 plus every year. Universal credit is for essentials, not to prop up the council. We have continually asked for the waste rounds to be looked at if health and safety to our staff is as much of a priority as in the report. Wheeled bin rounds, 1,200. Sack rounds, 1,800. This is why our collectors struggle, but nothing is done and we never get a response. We're having to resurvey our ward, as when we did it last time, the ward did not want wheel bins. Obviously, that wasn't the answer. Our residents feel this is wheeled bins by stealth, as once the vehicles at the cost of £1 million are adapted, it will be easier to bring in other wheel bins. Sacks will still be collected, so what's the point? And more money will have to be spent on communication, extra wardens, and the technology. So it's not just the £1 million. There is little, and I cannot get any answers on where, who, and how this community composting scheme is supposed to work. For those that opt out, this is extremely important. I also thought we were supposed to be decreasing car use, not increasing it, as if you opt out, you have to take your garden waste to the recycling centre. Surely the residents who can home compost are already doing so. So this would not add to the service at all. Also in 11.4 of this report, it says that the cost of the service is not to be met by general taxpayer. So does that mean that council tax rebates for those that have already brought bins and one for those that pay for the service that they have never used? So are our residents going to get a tax rebate? No thought has been given to disabled or the blind, having to negotiate narrow paths with cars parked and now a bin. I know there are some councillors and officers on the council desperate for wheeled bins, but not by ignoring the wishes of the residents. I have tried to get responses, but was told to read the report, not set too much store in the Gazette article, which I find arrogant and unhelpful. Our residents need our help and support through this difficult and harrowing time, not be forced to pay more money they cannot afford. Thank you for listening.
Oxford, thank you very much indeed. Again, some points raised there. No officers and Councillor Goss will be taking note of. Councillor Sue Lissamore, please.
Lovely. Thank you very much. As we all know, this is a unique time. COVID has hit this council, it's hit businesses, it's hit residents. No one can underestimate the financial effect, not just now, but into the considerable future. If the council ignored this, it would be a financial disaster. So it is right that this council looks and what it can do to identify new sources of income. However, following the announcement by Councillor Martin Goss that the council want to charge for collection of garden waste, we have been inundated by residents who understand the financial constraints but see that this charge is wrong and is being introduced at the wrong time. Not only is this council suffering financially, so are our residents. Jobs have been lost and the prospect of finding a new one diminishing. Applications for universal credit have increased dramatically. With us all suffering financially, now is not the time to put more pressure on residents. We are all looking at our household budgets, and I believe that when households are faced with deciding to take up this extra charge, they will say no. I do not believe that you will have the take up that you would have done before COVID, and you are basing your costings and projections on unrealistic expectations. You're spending just over £1.1 million on wheeled bins and vehicle adaptations, and presume you will get a 50% take up, which will be cost effective by 21-22. But if you don't get 50% take up due to residents' budgetary constraints, this will not be profitable for the council. The basis of your take up is pre-COVID. Lots has changed since then. This policy is wheelie bins by stealth. In 2016, councillors were given a choice, and the huge majority of councillors, on behalf of the residents, opted for no wheelie bins. Our refuse collectors do an amazing job, but it is wrong to transfer the onus of injury and safety to residents. A large majority of our residents do not want wheelie bins. They would struggle to manage them. And the answer of assisted collections does not help. This only slows your service down and puts the onus on the refuse collector to move the wheelie bin rather than the resident. I do not believe you have correctly analysed the number of assisted collections if having wheelie bins will generate. The council's IT system is already not coping with the assisted collection scheme. When a resident who has assisted collection moves on, the details are not removed from the system, and so your list that you work on is clogged and out of date. This system needs to be updated before you add an additional number of assisted collections. Emptying of wheelie bins into refuse lorries takes longer than emptying bags. We saw during the peak of COVID a huge drop in staff numbers, enough so that recycling was suspended. This has highlighted a real vulnerability within the service. The age of the refuse collectors tends to be older than other councils. If we had another health crisis, even if it's a local outbreak of flu or a bad cold, we do not have the resilience to deal with it. By slowing down the service by using wheelie bins, you are risking a collapse of the system. We already have collections on a Saturday to catch up on what has been missed. And due to the collapse of the system during COVID, residents have lost confidence in the system. Many residents have said to me, why should I pay when I have no guarantee it will be collected? Miscollections are reduced apparently, it states in the report. This is because wheelie bins are more conspicuous. Residents leave them in their front garden. They are bulky, unsightly. You are increasing extra plastic into the environment. The report states if residents can't fit in a wheelie bin, they will be offered bags. However, your whole scheme relies on a large use of wheelie bins. You will have to use very stringent tests to ensure this policy works, and so it will be difficult for residents to get an alternative bag service. The report states you want to simplify the service to make it more efficient. However, you are complicating the system more by having to offer more assisted collections, more choice of bag or bin. You should not use the collapse of the refuse collections due to COVID as a reason to introduce charges and introduce wheelie bins. The report states your review will improve the health and well-being of residents. How? The report says it will enable residents to be proud of Colchester and its council. How can residents be proud of the council when they are being asked for more money with no increase in service? How can residents be proud when Colchester was one of only 2% of councils, according to the Local Government Association, that had to suspend recycling during COVID? A garden tax does not encourage pride in our town. It encourages disappointment and frustration, paying more out for the same service. The report says you want to improve access to services online. We know this alienates a certain percentage of the population who are not online. Why does charging for garden waste improve customer access to services online? The report says it will optimise systems and technology more effectively. How? It's not optimising the system, it's just changing it from majority bags to majority wheelie bins. I've already said the system for assisted collections is out of date. This needs to be addressed before a new system is introduced. Garden Club members will receive a digital welcome leaflet and suggest they join a Facebook page. What about those not online again? The report says it's an aim to promote Colchester and its green spaces. How, by putting a huge wheelie bin outside of a property, does that promote Colchester? Despite complaints about garden waste bags blowing away once they're emptied, they are not a blight on our front garden like a wheelie bin. We saw during COVID, when recycling was suspended, an increase in fly tipping. We have some areas of our borough, such as dikes, parks, recreation grounds and other areas that all suffered from fly tipping. Some residents believe, as garden waste is biodegradable, it is acceptable to fly tip it, throw it over the back fence. If residents decide not to take a bin because they cannot afford it, there will be an increase in fly tipping. You are anticipating a 25% drop in garden waste if the new system is introduced. That is 2.5 million kilos of recycling. 2.5 million kilos. That 25% must go somewhere. Some of it will be fly tipped. Some of it will go in the back bag collections. And we mustn't forget that the whole reason garden waste collection was introduced was to take this waste out of the black bag system. Some of the 25% of dropout will end up back in our black bag. That will cost this council, and I cannot see any figures on this impact. And it will not make bags lighter, which will increase the load of refuse collectors that when they have to pick them up. This will not help their injuries. The report states it's more energy efficient and reduces climate impact. How? Home composting is a science which does not work unless you have the right amount of different types of waste. Just putting grass clippings in a bin does not produce compost. It produces a green, smelly slime. Many residents don't have room for compost bins. They don't collect the right mix of waste. And how can this council state this new policy reduces climate impact when the report states you want residents to get in their vehicle and take their waste to the household waste recycling centre? Many residents don't have a vehicle that's suitable. Recycling centres are already overwhelmed. It's another reason why this policy is too early. Colchester Borough Council need to work with Essex County Council to reorganise the Shrub End site before you start recommending sending more residents there. Get a new entrance, reduce the queuing, reorganise the site, which is jointly owned by Colchester and Essex, to fit the 21st century and the extra houses that have and will be built. I think you will get very few neighbours joining together. One resident still has to be the lead and be the registered property. You have to have a very close relationship with your neighbour to ensure this works in a balanced way, and that is rare. Same with community composting. It can be all take and no give. Garden Club contradicts what the council says it wishes to do, which is to stop non-statutory services. Garden Club would be non-statutory. This puts more work on the rangers, landscape designers and tree officer. Anyone who has asked questions on trees in our borough know already how stretched that service is. Garden Club only adds to their workload, and I see no budget for this in the report. Seeds and gardening starter packs. We have, as councillors, have just been asked to contribute from our locality budget to fund this because there is no further money. I see no budget for this in the report. We have also done some calculations on the capacity of bins and believe the bags hold far more. The lid on a bin has to be shut, for example. It's difficult for the elderly or those with disabilities to add waste to the bins and impossible to push waste down, especially with something like autumn leaves. And let's not forget, it wasn't that long ago that we actually had double quantity collections in the autumn. Many residents collected leaves and debris from council trees. Many have already stopped doing this because they lost the 8-bag collection service. If they have no garden waste collection, more will stop. There will be an increase in block drains and street sweeping. This report admits there'll be a drop in recycling, but not how you will mitigate this. The report says commercially savvy marketing. How much will that cost? And again, who will miss out because they are not online? Whilst there are discounts for low-income households, it is still an increase for them. How can all afford it? We have had an increase in complaints over bonfires during the lockdown, as residents did their best to get rid of waste that the council failed to collect. With what we now know of the increase in localised pollution from bonfires and the effect it has on residents recovering from COVID or with asthma or COPD, we do not want there to be another increase in bonfires. However, the most common reaction I have had from residents following this announcement is, "I'll burn it." This is not good for our health. I also believe that this policy breaches the council's climate emergency agenda. Big words and statements on climate change are very easy to make, and doing something is far harder. What this council is doing is increasing vehicle usage, increasing fly tipping, increasing pollution through bonfires, and increasing the amount of what is recyclable waste in our black bags. This is not the direction we should be going in. To quote some residents, Caroline, a few years ago, you decided to be greener, cleaner, Colchester. Fly tipping is a particular blight on Westlands and Stanway, as we are lucky enough to have Grimes Dyke, which has been there since Roman times and includes very rare stag beetles, badgers, foxes, and other woodland creatures. However, people see this natural environment and feel it's a good place to dump litter and green waste, as after all, it's only grass and weeds. What people don't realise is that it changes the pH balance and native plants don't grow anymore. If you want to find savings, I suggest you look at all the money that's been spent out on planning garden cities, which has not come to fruition, or mad schemes that never go anywhere, and don't get me started on metal elephants. Another resident, the savings predicted will be largely offset by the increase in financial and environmental costs of fly tipping. The waste will go somewhere, and it's not right for the council to encourage more journeys to the tip. Mr. Alan Morgan, unfortunately, the council has gone from one of the best refuse collectors and recycling services to what we have now, with a huge increase in environmental problems. Taking the majority of garden waste out of the council system will reduce the recycling percentage in the National League, on which the council puts such importance. And from Chris Piggott, is the collection of garden waste now a privilege in Colchester? What is the plan to protect our quality of the air? We therefore suggest a public full review of all non-statutory services so that all councillors on behalf of their residents can see what changes can be made without there being an additional cost to them. We also suggest a full review of refuse services IT systems to ensure the assisted collection is capable of dealing with extra demand and that in-cab technology is working properly. We also suggest a full update on where both Colchester Borough Council and Essex County Council are on the reorganising the Shrub End Recycling Centre, and do not suggest extra trips to the site until it is capable of taking the extra demand. And a full consultation to gather better information on what take-up would be. And lastly, you'll be pleased to hear, thank you to all our refuse staff. Thank you for coping with what has been an incredibly difficult year. Thank you to all the support staff, from customer services right through to the back office and to the managers. And a final plea on behalf of our residents, do not introduce this garden tax when residents are at their most vulnerable. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lissamore. Councillor Mark Goucher.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Councillor Mark Goucher. I'm councillor for Castle Ward, Colchester, the Green.
Mark, you might need to just sit a bit closer to your microphone. You're a little bit quiet.
Okay, is that better?
Yes, better. That's
okay.
better, thank you.
I'll try and be louder. Okay. For anyone who's watching on Facebook or whatever, or wherever it's broadcast, YouTube, I'm the Green Councillor for Castle Ward. And I'm very concerned about this development, this proposal. Since it was announced, I've received lots of communications from residents pointing out that what we have here is basically a non-progressive garden tax. Because that's basically what it is. It takes no account of people's ability to pay. It's a flat rate regardless of income, and therefore it is not a progressive tax. And it's a tax on gardens, because people who have gardens are the people who will be using the service. So in that sense, yes, it is a garden tax. But my primary concern is about the environmental impact of this. Being the only Green councillor on the council, that's probably quite predictable. The problem with it is that by introducing a financial cost to getting the garden waste removed, you're inevitably incentivizing more car journeys to the recycling centre. It's inevitable. Also, you're incentivizing people to just put the garden waste in black bags if they can get away with it. Now, I'm in no way encouraging those things. Indeed, I welcome the aspect of the proposal that involves encouraging people to home compost. And I'll be encouraging as many people to do that. However, we have to be realistic. A lot of people have very small gardens or will not feel able to home compost, or to be honest, let's be realistic, will simply choose not to do so. And when this is proposed, you have to take into account human behaviour, not human behaviour in an idealistic sense, how we all hope people will behave, how people really do behave. And taking that into account, it's clear that this will lead to more car journeys to the recycling centre, more people putting waste in black bags, may or may not increase fly tipping, I'm less certain on that. Also, it's an incentive to people to pave over their gardens if they can afford it, get it out of the way in one financial payment, and then never bother with the garden again. But I think the biggest problem will be the increased car journeys to the recycling centre, because that's what many people will choose to do. There obviously will be a take-up of the scheme, but lots of other people won't take it up. How many, we'll have to see. Now, a lot of talk is being made about this being in order to balance the books, but the amount of money this will save will not balance your books. Your financial problems are going to be too large for that, because of the coronavirus. And this is a drop in the ocean financially. It won't solve the financial problems. It's too small an amount of money to do that. So I just do not buy the argument that this makes sense in order to balance the books, because it's not a big enough saving to do that. You're going to have to find far more savings than that, or you're going to have to lobby the government to bail us out. Simple as that, if you want to balance the books. But the main problem for me is environmental. And July last year, we all voted for the climate change emergency. And the climate change emergency has to mean something in spirit as well as in the letter of what we have to do. And to me, this is not in the spirit of the climate emergency declaration to do something which incentivizes more car journeys, more putting green waste into landfill. That, for me, is not the spirit of the climate change emergency. And I don't think that fits in with that at all, this proposal. It's essentially taxing people who want to get their waste collected and recycled by us, basically. So they will find alternatives. And obviously, but there's a composting element to this, that is true. But the composting element doesn't take into account, as I said at the beginning, human nature. A lot of people will choose not to do that. I'd like everybody to home compost, but realistically, I know they won't. So you have to take that into account when deciding on the environmental impact of this. Now, also, I'd like to know whether this has been fully environmentally impact assessed, because I've read the report and item 18 at the bottom, the last item on it, concerns the environmental impact, and it is incredibly sparse, and it suggests that more people will choose not to dispose of their garden waste, and that will have a positive environmental effect. Well, yes, more people may well not take up the scheme than before, and there'll be less collected. Doesn't mean it'll have a positive environmental effect if they're driving it to the recycling centre in their car. Doesn't mean it will have a positive environmental effect if they're putting green waste that could be composted in black bags. So I don't think that environmental assessment is adequate. It's the last item on it. It's sparse and it doesn't include any data on what has happened in those areas where they, the 65% or what it is, who already have the garden cap. So I'd like to see in an environmental impact report data on what the effect on the environment has been in the 65% who already have a financial payment for collecting of garden waste. And if that's in the report, and if there is clear evidence, data that it has no real impact in terms of increased car journeys to the tip, and it doesn't always being pulling black bags, and positive environmental impact, not a negative one, fine, I'll accept that. But I don't think there is any evidence that such an environmental impact assessment has been carried out. And therefore, again, that means this is not in the spirit of the Climate Change Emergency Declaration. Thank you.
Coach, thank you very much indeed. In this section, Councillor Lee Scordus.
Hello, everyone. Everyone can hear me okay?
Yep.
Excellent. I think Leslie made an important point at the start about why we are where we are with this decision. Financing is obviously a significant issue that we're facing. We were told by the government we'd get help. Unfortunately, that seems to be very forthcoming. So we are where we are, and we have to be honest with the people of Colchester about why we're doing this. I think we have to be quite clear that there is a problem here with our finances. And everyone I've spoken to, no one is, everyone is doing this with a heavy heart. And Councillor Gocher makes the point this won't cover all our costings. He's right. This is going to be the first of some very tough decisions that our council is going to make, as well as other councils are going to have to make. So I think there's some quite good things in this. Personally, I think the home composting thing's a good idea. Obviously, there are some people who do have small gardens that won't want to take it up, but there's a lot of people in Colchester that have quite medium and large size gardens that will want to take it up. And there's a few I'm aware of in my ward that have a small garden that said they're quite interested in getting a composter. So a lot of it will be down to what people want to do. I also think the community compost is a very good idea about looking, getting communities working together, changing behaviour. We already have one of these on the new Town Old Heath border in the community garden where people can use this. That's already working quite well. So people in that area aren't as worried about this, fortunately. And I've talked to Rory, who said that CBC will help with this, with communities that need that. So that's really helpful, and I think that's a positive. And the idea as well that some neighbours who may have smaller gardens, or they may have smaller amount of garden waste, can share with their neighbours. It's very helpful as well, I believe. I imagine there's some in my ward that you'll have 5 or 6 households that would be quite happy to share that. Obviously, there'll be some that won't. There'll be some that have a lot of grass trimmings. They have hedges overgrown every year. One idea that's been mentioned around, could they pay slightly less to have just collections in the summer and spring when we see greater growth? Some people will prefer that all year. So whether that's an option that the officers could look at, that would be quite interesting. And just to end on quite a few questions, Chair, just bits of clarification, really. First one is, will there be an exemption for those on council tax support and pensioners who don't have access to a private pension? The garden sacks, will they differ from the current ones? Because obviously with the bins, we're putting a sticker on them so people know. Are we going to end up in a scenario where people have their garden sacks, they know who pays for the subscription, and they put all their garden sacks in front, and suddenly you get a neighbourhood dispute? What figures are analysis have we done on looking at how bonfires could increase and fly tipping? Obviously, areas for community compost, I think councillors and residents are going to need help on that. Some areas are a lot more urban and won't have as much diversity as other areas where they could do this. Wheelie bin routes, if we're looking at garden wheelie bin routes, currently, as I understand it, a route needs to be about 2,000 properties under the current system, or maybe it's just under that. But for example, I cycled through the Riverside estate today. If people wanted wheelie bins there, that would be quite perfect for that. While the Dutch Quarter, obviously, we'd all agree, people don't have side access. That would be completely inappropriate. So would the routes be slightly smaller to allow some streets or estates to have wheelie bins? And the last one is obviously areas that have wheelie bins, if they don't take on the system, their wheelie bin will be taken away. Now, in the report, we've already forecast how much we're going to spend on buying bins, and it's quite a substantial amount. Wouldn't it make sense to hold off on that first? Because if we get quite a lot of people within those areas with wheelie bins who want to give their wheelie bin back, that can help with our savings, as they can be recycled and reused, especially if those who aren't using it, they probably have rarely used their wheelie bin at all. So it's unlikely to be damaged or rotting inside. So that's me, Chair, and I'll leave you to carry on the meeting.
Councillor Scholars, thank you very much indeed. And officers, again, will have heard all your comments. A lot of questions in those as well. I'm sure Mr. Doyle and Councillor Goss will pick those up in their presentation. Now, slightly changed the agenda. Councillor David King asked whether he could present the finances ahead of actually the garden paper, and I thought that was very useful for us all to understand where we are. It's a moving feast, as we've heard. Money has been announced, some money has been given, and if you're keeping an absolute careful eye on it, then you might not know what that means. So I thought, therefore, Councillor King's input with finances would be useful in this discussion. So may I go to you, Councillor King? I think you've got some slides to show us, and then we'll move on to the main subject. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you everybody who's spoken tonight. Obviously the rest of you for attending and listening, but that's what I and I'm sure my colleagues will be doing. There goes the clock for those who've never heard it before.
We're just pausing, everyone, just while Councillor King's clock.
I do apologise. There will be another in a moment. It's nicer. Chair, if I may, I'd like to pick up some of the financial aspects of raising the questions, because I think there's a natural divide, and this will to some degree warm us up for what I will walk us through, which, with the respect I do have for scrutiny, is all about ensuring that members have both a reminder of the facts that were shared a month ago, were talked through at scrutiny a month ago, but a month is a long time, and the sense of shock that I think we all had a month or two ago. I think that's been a challenge for everybody in terms of what we absorb and what we retain. So I will, in a moment, walk us through the path from just a month ago, what we knew then, to what we know now, including, as you've said, the latest announcements from government. But I will just pick up, and I'm sure Councillor Goss will pick up the technical and garden waste specifics, pick up some of the financial questions that members, Mr. Hagan and others have raised. I'll do this briefly, but as I say, I think this will be a helpful warm-up. Some of the written questions touched on whether reductions in council tax were possible and the impact on low and limited incomes. We understand the latter point. The philosophy of the council, supported across the chamber, has always been to look out for those who are most vulnerable, and our record on local council tax support is one just illustration of that. I regret there is no possibility, in my view, of offering any kind of reduction in council tax, because for the reasons I'll show later, we're in such a serious position that is just not a practicality. But I understand the sentiment, and listening to those concerns and how we address them is part of our only way that we can do this, which is together. Here we go, clock number 2. After this, Chair, we're good for an hour, you'll be pleased to know. I'd like to pick up on Leslie Scott Boutel's remarks, if I may, but I will give it a second. My apologies.
I think you're all curious as to why your clocks are at different times. Oh, presumably there are 7 bombs. Now, I'll give the audio description of what's going on for people listening. There's audio bombs going off for 7 now. Is that right?
You are an exemplar mimic of a clock, Councillor Bentley, and I value you even more for it. Leslie Scott Boutel started and ended with the reality that the challenge is one created for us, but I've always tried to be apolitical about this matter, which is what we should do in scrutiny, as you and I have discussed. Reality is government have done on the economics a fantastic job, in my personal view. Not that all my colleagues want me to say that, but they have not kept the promise that was initially made. We might understand why, but the effects, which we'll walk through before, is leave us in a really serious difficulty. And to the question, should we be lobbying, and several members raised that, the answer is absolutely yes. We'd like to think in our small way we've made some difference, because we have lobbied with other district councils and the county councils. We've used collective access, I suspect, but we've all made the point, our chief executive, our leader, on our collective behalf, have helped create the atmosphere in which government's made another really big step. But as we'll talk through later on, it's not enough. There are points about estimating costs and realism, which we always understand. These kind of numbers before you go into it, and it's true actually for the wider piece, are subject to the reality of what we find, but all of the numbers are based upon experience elsewhere, and in that sense they do have some robustness. I do accept the point that Councillor Lissamore made well, which is of course pre-COVID and post-COVID are different things. We might expect some differences, but to be frank, given the concessions which mean that we're going to take away or modify some of the costs for people who most need, it's a reasonable expectation that the rest of us, or most of us, might be able to do what we planned to do before COVID. You know, we're going to see, aren't we? We recognise we're on the edge of an economic emergency. I want to acknowledge as well that a lot of this is about alternatives, and Councillor Scott Boutel touched on that, and a cross-party approach. There is no way in which we cannot, through scrutiny, in my view, not learn from each other. This is a complex proposal about an absolutely legitimate way of raising income, and as I again will set out, we have to see it in context. I will show, as requested, some of those alternatives. It's part of an exploration which will continue through the whole of this year, because it does take time to go up and down all the services that members know well, judge the costs, judge the choices, and to be frank, understand the consequences should elsewhere the collective or the administration's bright view be, we'll stop that or we'll do less of that, because we don't have a lot of fact, we do not have a lot of choice. Everything we will do, we need to understand this, is going to be difficult. I'm not going to perhaps touch on much more than that, other than to acknowledge, and I thank them all for observations which I hope they'll find are met, including Mark Goach's, if I may. And there is one thing for me before I start, and Councillor Lissamore, I really did listen to you, and you speak well, and everybody has, from my perspective, has been thoughtful about how they see it and the interests of their ward. And those of us in administration, we're here to represent the collective council and the collective people of culture as much as we can. But there was something about pride, and please accept a gentle pushback. We've got lots of reasons to have pride in our council in the round, whatever the disappointment of the day. As you closed, you know, we can be proud of the people that we often acknowledge do a great job, and waste and recycling amongst the most difficult things. As Councillor Goss knows, he's worn his feet out going around and testing it. Hopefully he will again. But if you wanted just a couple of examples, we win awards, and I know the awards business is one of those where they're put up for people to bid for, but seriously, this is a competitive business, and each year our teams win awards. You know, the best benefits and welfare team of the year. That's fantastic. That's getting the money in, and then it's partly about spending it well. We've won awards and we've had acknowledgement for the quality of our waste and recycling service and our environmental impact. Third best, I think it was, in the UK. Our waste and recycling levels, they may be damaged. It's a fair point, Councillor Gocher, but I ask colleagues to look at this tonight in the round, and when I give you some sense of this, I hope that we'll, between us, just remember what we do well collectively, what our people do well for us. Chair, if you're okay, I will turn to the slides and ask for the first.
Yes, maybe. So we see the financials. Thank you.
I think it would be helpful to members to remind us all, and it's, as I say, it seems a while ago, of where we were at the last scrutiny review. These are the numbers that were in the budget strategy then, and this was the approach which I'm pleased to say you, Chair, amongst others, were fairly generous about in acknowledging how swiftly we had responded, not only to the wider crisis, which again, I think is some cause for us to feel good about Colchester, but also on the financials. So we've done some deep work analysis and risk analysis. So here is a reminder, a black hole before the latest financial help of something like £12 million, which against a net budget, which is not the sum of all the money that flows through us, because we pass lots of money on, for example, in benefits and so on, but against what the Section 151 also recommends I use as a test, and it's 60%. This is a really big challenge. And it's a challenge that's not just for the year, it's for the years that follow. And in many senses, that's perhaps more of a concern, because you can dig to reserves briefly, but you can only use them once. 1 to 5 are the points that we put to the last scrutiny panel, with an acknowledgement that those are the right kinds of thing to do. So absolutely, as repeated tonight by many members, lobby government, get your money back. The money you spent, it's serving the public as they require, and get your money back for the income it's lost because we, like others, were closed down. Now, it's widely known, and it's in the full flush of ministers seeking to be helpful. The words, whatever it takes were uttered. I think most of us understood that was going to be unlikely, that some kind of furlough principle would be applied to us, but these are the points that were made. Transform, review our fees and charges, which is underway, look for efficiency, and we can always find some, and we are, and use the reserves, but no more than we must. So that, Chair, was where we were. Next slide, please. I know they're there, Owen.
Richard, can we have the next slide, please?
Yeah, I'm on it, Owen. Just got some technical difficulties.
No worries, thank you.
David, can you carry on while we wait?
I will, Chair, while we wait for the second slide. What I wanted to do, and just to remind members, I know some have picked this up over the weekend, we have had support before and we've had welcome support since. So a reminder of what we've had in support was we had £2 million worth in a couple of individual grants. We furloughed our staff, which got us another million or so, and we've got a technical piece of help, that's interesting, which is that our business rates and council tax losses could be spread over 3 years. All those help. If you think 12 million, they all help. Some money in and then the ability to spread your costs. The latest announcements, the really big hitter in terms of giving something of real substance. It's around the issue of income support. It's a good number, but it's very conditional. So I'm just, bear with me, Chair, I will just talk us through so members that haven't spotted this do get this. So it's at best as a headline, 2/3 of our losses, and it's probably for 1 year only. Now, I believe government will do what they've said. They'll look at local council, local government needs at the end of the year. You will know better, Councillor Bentley, just how many of those needs are. And I'm really hopeful that you'll be successful in your bidding for shovel-ready or soon-to-be-ready construction projects. But the answer we all know is that the demands are exceed the expectation, in truth. and the nation has got the hugest of challenges. So what we've got is what we can count on, nothing else. So we can count on 2/3 of our losses, 1 year only. The formula given to us is that authorities will bear the first 5% of lost income. Government will bear 75% and local authorities 25% of the rest. So in short terms, you know, as I've said, you know, think 2/3, 1/3. What does it mean in numbers? Think 12 million, the starter, with some help before that. Well, it depends, as ever, on the small print. And the small print's really interesting because it's not yet confirmed, but it could exclude some parts of commercial income. For us, who are a landlord and with a good track record developing commercial companies, we really need to understand that. At the moment, we think that might mean £1 million less than could be possible. So the number we're thinking of at this time is it could be worth 4.5 million. That's a huge help, but that's nowhere near enough. And as I've said, what I worry about most is future years, and I think it would be wise not to count on anything. I've looked, as members have mentioned, and you would expect me to look, can we raise money and can we cut money? So let's just look at that first. Can we raise extra income? There is this review going on at the moment, down dozens of line items which will produce something. But if you look at it in top level terms, most people will know that things where we earn most money are car parks, commercial rents, and sports and leisure. So if I just briefly spell it out, if we wanted to raise just 1 minute, sorry, good heavens, where are we?
I've got your slide up now, David, which talks about the money you've just been talking about.
That's kind of, yes, it shows you I should have numbered my slides, but there we go. That, as you look at it, is the challenge we still have, and it's the longer term which we've talked to. Next slide, please. It's a scale I hope that colleagues really do we get. I start, well, back 1, back 2. This is going well. Go back. Well, I'm going to go and do it in my odd way, Chair, which is nothing like I worked on this afternoon. So on extra income, keeping this brief, if you just want to understand what it's like to raise £1 million, 1 million, so equate this to garden waste. With car, oh dear.
I think, look,
Thank you. This will be brief, Chair, and give me 5 minutes or so and I'll close. How about that?
Yes, that's fine.
All right. Look at the slides and see the challenge that you have to address to raise £1 million. None of these are practical. Look down them. Raise car park income, damage your town centre. Go for commercial rents, you can't raise them. Raise sports and leisure income, you can't do that, they're closed. We looked at the smaller services, all of it is a monstrous rise, a crippling rise in this competitive market. Next slide. Can we save the extra millions? One of the questions members have put to us, here are some illustrations of how you could save just £1 million, but we need to do that 6 or 7 times over. We could cut funding to voluntary groups or locality funding, stop all discretionary housing payments. We could cut back on some of the staff who do the frontline services so many of us want. And we could look at parts of the parts of the recycling service. But the point I want to make is, it's at the bottom, is anything we do is going to be uncomfortable and difficult and almost certainly will mean job losses. And there's a little equation for us to try and remember that every £1 million is something like 30 jobs lost. And given where we are as a country, but as a council, that would be unattractive. Next slide. Very briefest of points. We are frugal, prudent and low tax, and I think most of us want to keep it that way. So the top shows where you are compared to your comparator group. And the answer is we have rather better reserves than many of them are earmarked and only last for a period, but it shows we've been managing the finances well. And the bottom left is perhaps most useful. Council tax increases, we've kept them as low as we can under 20% for the last 10 years, less than inflation. And how does that compare? The point I'm making, you understand, we haven't charged a garden waster now. We haven't been an expensive local authority, irrespective of the colour, frankly. We've all tried to keep council tax low. Next slide. So final slide, Chair, you'll be pleased. So the spirit in which I'm approaching this is to share some information, leave a sense of the whole, make it plain that we are addressing this in the way that we should, and to, if I respectfully can, to put to you a request about where we stand and where we go. So we're doing what Scrutiny Panel a month ago thought was very sensible. Seek extra funding, make efficiencies, cut costs and raise some income. We've demonstrated at Blackhall that we can't just make go away. Whatever we do, we've got a significant savings balance and challenge. It will rise in the years that lie ahead. And I give you a sense of the scale that even with garden waste charges and the alternative, I want to just say this, the only other way you could raise a significant sum of money is by a significant council tax increase. That's not what any of us would want to do. And it's less fair than, frankly, a garden waste charge would be that at least goes to the user of the service. These are my suggestions. I ask for scrutiny. However much you may mark our card on this, a positive acknowledgement of the challenge. That's the critical grown-up thing to do. And to help us, as in my view, scrutiny should, to find a way through this and acknowledging the limited choices I have spelt out. That's it. Thank you.
Councillor King, thank you very much indeed. Can I just ask at this stage, any panel member, whether they would like to ask a question? I won't go through the names, just unmute and say we'd like to ask a question at this stage before we move on to the main paper. No? Okay, that's fine then. Now, it is 7:15. Sorry, Councillor Bourne.
Sorry, Chair, it took a long time to unmute.
No worries.
For some reason, there's a slight delay. Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to ask Councillor King what information, can he remind us what information he gave at the last Scrutiny Panel meeting in June? Is there anything new that, that we hadn't seen before?
Absolutely, it's the same and different. So you had the information on the earlier slide. It's the £12 million problem made up of lost income, over 9 million, and our expectation of lost business rates and council tax receipts. And at that point, we had the expectation that we would make some progress with government. What I've tried to show today is that we have. We've had £2 million in the first tranche, 1 million or so on furlough. Lots of numbers, I know. The important thing is what's just come through still leaves us with a huge bottom line difference this year and over the next 4 years of between 3 and 6 million. And that reflects the progress, if you like, of the last month. In the background, Councillor Bourne, lots of work is going on to look at how we might, if you like, deliver on the rest of the bargain put as the strategy to scrutiny. Right, to find efficiencies and find cuts with the least impact. So we've been successful as much as you can in getting money from government, been successful in making a start on reorganisation. We've described that in the headline terms, but this is a numbers exercise that will go on through the year. And what you've heard today, that is new. The strategy isn't, it's the same as endorsed at scrutiny. What's new is that we're clearer on the current finances and we know the limitations of the help that government can afford to give us.
Thank you very much indeed, and thank you, Councillor Vaughan. Right, it is coming up for 7:20. If we start this next paper, we're going to go past the 7:30 deadline. I'm just going to propose that we do that, and if we're still going at 8, we'll take a few minutes break then, because we've got to think about people who are working here as well. So, is one content we just push on until 8 o'clock? Tell me not if you're not, otherwise we'll move on to that. Lovely, that's what we'll do then. Okay, so can I now invite Councillor Goss and Mr. Doyle to take us through the paper. I mean, we've read the paper, so you don't need to repeat what's in the paper. We've read it. Just, I think there's some questions that would need to be answered from some of the members and indeed the members of public who wrote and spoke tonight. And then, of course, we'll have our questions at the end if it's not been already covered. Councillor Goss, can I ask you to introduce the item, please?
Yeah, thank you everybody, and thank you to all speakers. I've certainly made some copious notes and I'll try and cover this during the presentation, and Rory will pick up some more technical points along with Rosa as well. So we'll make sure we cover everything as thoroughly as we can this evening. So for me, this is not an easy decision that we're potentially asking people to sign up to. We are in unprecedented times, as you've heard, and you've seen the finances from David. So for me, you know, personally, this is not an easy thing to be wrestling with. So why is change needed? Well, we understand that there is a broad spectrum of views on this proposal, and many would like the current free service maintained. However, as we've said, from a cost perspective, it is not sustainable. Reviewing the waste and recycling service was already one of our strategic priority projects pre-COVID-19, and this is now a key work stream in the Council's recovery programme to ensure that savings are generated urgently to address the budget cap and protect other services that residents value. And the waste and recycling service is resilient and continues to improve and maintain upper quartile performance on waste and recycling, which it does when you compare the figures to other authorities. We are outperforming them, and our recycling has increased exponentially, as we've seen in previous reports. But this is a difficult decision. There's an urgency for us to make difficult decisions to address the budget gap and protect other services. Colchester is the minority that do not charge for what in effect is a free non-statutory function that many local authorities have implemented over the years. Some have done them 15 years ago, if not longer. And therefore, many organisations have been charging. 65% of councils do charge for garden waste removal and recycling. And obviously Colchester is actually in the minority that doesn't at this stage. Personally, I'd like to leave it in the minority and not charge, but we are in unprecedented times when we are having to look and review at everything, as painful as it is. Personally, it's painful for me. The recommendations allow the council to continue to be able to offer a service to residents that want to subscribe, and every effort has been made to ensure the service is as affordable and accessible as possible, whilst balancing the need for a sound and viable business case. The council is one of the highest performing local authorities in the region for waste and recycling, and will continue to encourage waste reduction, reuse and composting in line with the waste strategy and climate emergency action plan. And residents have an important part to play in this and are responsible for the waste that they produce ultimately, and therefore need to ensure that they reduce, reuse and recycle. The business case itself is presented, and it prudently sets out clearly the revenue and capital implications. There is confidence in these projections based on learnings from other local authorities that we've obviously been liaising with, not just on costs and take-up, but also the environmental impacts, recycling, bonfires and all the other elements that people have obviously been raising. Based on these projections, the service will generate 420k in financial year 2021 and 1 million in future years. But what is the difference of the child service? Well, the paid for garden waste collection offered by other local authorities simply just picks up the waste from the curbside and that's it. One of the things that I've absolutely impressed upon the team looking at this is that I don't just want to replace a service where we pick up waste and then just have to charge people like other local authorities. I want to make this a value add proposition so people actually feel they're getting something more than just what they're currently getting. And this value is going to be at no cost to the subscriber in terms of the value add. Yes, there's a cost of picking up the bins, but we want to make sure that we add value with offers, events, tutorials and other information on garden waste minimisation. So why wheeled bins? It's a fair question, a fair challenge. Wheeled bins provide the cleanest, safest and most efficient means of storing and collecting garden waste from properties. And we know we can deliver a better performing garden waste service that protects the safety and well-being of our staff by using wheel bins as the principal means of collection. It's included in the report. Sickness levels are higher with staff that have to pick up the Hessian sacks, and that is because they pick up tons and tons of waste. When they go out, they walk 11 miles. I've done it. I've been out. I've done a garden waste round. I've done a full day, and I've done the black sack route as well. I've done a full day, and it is absolutely strenuous. You are picking up tons and tons of waste, both garden waste and black sack. So by introducing wheeled bins, 83% of councils have wheeled bins of some form. Obviously, Colchester has nearly 13,000 houses on wheeled bins, nearer to 12,000 actually on garden waste, because some properties have surrendered the bin because they didn't feel they needed it, and that is in the figures. So that is why we feel wheeled bins is the best way to deal with it, because the machine ends up doing the work, and muscle related sickness and issues that we have will reduce when you compare the two. And that, again, you can look at figures from other councils on that as well that have had wheeled bins for some years rather than Hessian sacks. It also means Hessian sacks don't blow away. The biggest complaint I get, and I'm sure councillors get, is that garden waste bags just disappear. They just seem to disappear into thin air, whether people pick them up by mistake or they just magically blow away. But there's obviously a cost to that. So what does this mean for residents? Well, what we have done, again, compared to other authorities, we've tried to make the costing and flexibility built into this as diverse as we possibly can. Most local authorities just charge you a one-off fee every year, around about April time, and they just want the money in the bank. They don't offer direct debit. They don't offer a reduction for people on benefits or people that can't afford to pay. And therefore, again, in Colchester, we've tried to be as diverse and flexible with the product that we have done here. So we do allow for flexible payment via direct debit, via quarterly direct debit. And we also do look to offer a reduction as well in the fee if people are on certain benefits, and more detail of that will be published. But again, other local authorities don't do this, and we've made sure Colchester has tried to include as much in this as we possibly can to reach as many different circumstances and backgrounds, because that again was really important when looking at this, because we just want to do more than other local authorities that do charge. That's always what we've tried to do in Colchester, and that is certainly very much part of my own values and very much close to me personally. So if people sign up in October, they pay £25 for the 6 months of service. Now, yes, through winter, there may be less garden waste generated, but there is no sign-up fee. So there is, in effect, for early adopters, an immediate discount of no sign-up fee if you sign up early. And then the same in year one. Again, if you sign up early, there is a discounted sign-up fee. And again, that's to encourage people to sign up. So we get the projected figures hit early, and we get people signed up and used to the service. So again, there's an annual fee of £50 to have the bins emptied and also be part of the Garden Waste Club and to get all the extra benefits that you get that we've outlined. So as a Garden Club member, residents will receive offers, discounts, access to advice, information, tutorials, promoting biodiversity, etc., and recycling. On the consultation front, there is an urgency for the council to immediately deliver savings and meet a budget pressure or risk uncertainty to other services, as David has already outlined, that are valued by residents. We've learned a lot from previous consultation, and the views of communities and groups will be factored in. An expression of interest programme will be run through July and August, which will enable residents to ask questions about the service that will be used to inform service design and delivery. And we've already seen actually a lot of calls and emails coming in from residents now asking about composting and about the service, because obviously they've read it in the press. So it's already creating an interest from people asking questions and asking about composting, which is in line with what other local authorities have seen. So the concerns have been raised about fly tipping and bonfires. This will be monitored closely, and action will of course be taken as necessary as they are reported. And obviously we've liaised with other local authorities, and although there is a slight spike at the beginning, it settles down, and actually you don't see an increase in fly tipping of garden waste or a huge increase in bonfire complaints, and those figures are obviously available from other local authorities. There's also concerns that garden waste will be diverted to landfill. Again, we will monitor that, but of course our policy is if we see garden waste in black bins or black sacks, we don't take it. So obviously the crews do monitor this, and education will be provided to ensure people are aware this is our policy. So this is uncharted territory. For me, this is personally very uncomfortable. I am not happy being asked to look at something so serious, but David has outlined the seriousness of the financial situation as well. And we think we will deliver a better and enhanced service with wheelie bins and with this service change, because it will mean a better service for residents. The majorities of councils do deliver a service that is charged for, because government has quite clearly for decades said that garden waste is obviously not a mandatory service that councils have to offer within council tax. And we are confident that the proposal will certainly successfully deliver the service, that it's financially sustainable. It will deliver savings and enable investment in the service, which will be good for both residents and our staff, and will provide a platform to promote waste reduction and composting with residents and communities. And it will enable us to provide a more resilient service that supports the well-being of our staff. Just to pick up on some of the questions, as I've made points this evening. In terms of the white sacks, it was asked what would happen to the white sacks. Well, residents would actually end up keeping the white sacks that they have already, and obviously they will keep those. But in terms of the wheeled bins, where we've rolled out just over 12,000 garden waste wheeled bins, where people do not opt for the service, and there'll be communication, we will then go and collect that bin, and we will then clean it, and as long as it's good enough quality and in good shape, we will then recycle it and obviously give it to a new customer. So we will obviously use existing stock and recycle it. In terms of how will people know whether they've signed up for the Garden Waste Club, yes, there'll be livery on the bins, but also the IT system in the cab will know whether they've been signed up for garden waste collections. So it will not allow garden waste to be collected from houses. If they present a bin, if they've got a rogue wheelie bin, if they put it out, it won't be collected because it won't be on the scheme. Unless they've paid for the scheme, it won't allow it to be collected. And the technology is very, very good. In terms of assisted collections, the system does work well. And I've not had Councillor Lismore reach out as my shadow portfolio holder to raise any issues that if somebody moves, that it doesn't get removed, but I'll take that away and look at it. But basically, the assisted collections will be offered in the same way they are now. If somebody needs their assisted collection, they will get it free of charge. The crews do that now, and again the IT technology flags up as people approach a house and it says assisted collection. Obviously if it's a regular crew they get to know that, but the technology is in the cab for those very reasons. We're not running off bits of paper. It is very 21st century because all that was brought in only a couple of years ago. So again the technology is very up to date and is upgraded and kept up to date. So in terms of the service, that is exactly what will happen. 70% of councils, just to correct a bit of misinformation that does seem to get pushed around, 70% of councils stopped or amended their waste collections during COVID-19. Colchester was one of them, not 2%. It was 70%. So I just wanted to correct that because that is misinformation that does seem to get peddled, and I've heard it again tonight. I just wanted to make that point. overall a very difficult decision, but what we've tried to do is package this in the best way we can and make it as affordable as possible, as well, by offering discounts, early sign up, and obviously taking into account benefits as well. So I'll leave it there for the moment, and I'll let Rory pick up on some more of the technical detail and other questions.
Thank you much, Councillor Goss. Mrs. Doyle, do you have much to add? Because I'm keen that we do. Not I want to stop talking, but I'm keen we get on to questioning from the panel.
Chair, I'll take your lead. I'm happy to pick up elements perhaps where I could provide more detail, or it may be best we hear some more questions and then deal with all of the detail.
Yes, I don't want. I want you to say as much as you want to say, but it could well be that it will come out in the questioning. So perhaps we can go to the panel. And if you feel that we haven't teased enough out of you, you can then tell us a bit more. If that's okay, Mr. Doyle. Right. So I'm just going to warn the panel members the order I'm going in, just for the excitement of the meeting. Go to Councillor Vaughan first, then Councillor Hayter. I will then go to Councillor McCarthy. I will then go to Councillor Whitehead. I will then go to Councillor Barber, then Councillor Hogg, then Councillor Dundas. In that order, I'll come in with questions at the end if mine haven't already been answered as the chair. So can we start, if we may, with Councillor Vaughan, please?
Thank you, Chair. I was caught on the hop then. I was going to
Sorry.
just a few questions first. Thank you.
I know it's come back to you, don't we?
Well, yes, if you could, because I'm still writing my questions. So,
all right, okay.
That would be great.
Okay, fair enough then. So, Councillor Hayter.
I've got nothing at the moment. A couple of things have been picked up already. A lot of the questions have been thrown about. Yeah, a couple of the issues I did have been answered. So for now, I've got nothing at the moment, but I may want to come back at a later point.
No, everyone gets a chance to keep going. I'm not doing this once. I'm just getting the initial order done. Councillor McCarthy.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you to Councillor King for his presentation, and indeed Councillor Goss. I understand how difficult this has been for you both. I just have a couple of questions, if I may. Councillor Goss, you mentioned that the impact on fly tipping, etc., is it simmers down pretty sharpish. But for my residents in Shrub End and the neighbouring wards of Prettygate and Stanway, the waste recycling centre, when there's a build-up of traffic, it can cause an awful lot of difficulty for people getting by, and indeed, just a sheer volume of traffic is never a good thing. How will we mitigate the impact on the Shrub End Waste Centre from the off? And my second question, if I may, I know there's bits in the paper, but for mainly the recording, for the benefit of those listening, how can we support our lowest earners, the elderly, the disabled? You know, what are we going to have in place to be able to support them? Because we must, and it's part of who we are as an administration. Thank you.
Thank you for the questions. I'll answer succinctly. So the recycling centre, again, just to pick up on some earlier points, is owned by Essex County Council. Part of the site is owned by Colchester, but that's where we operate the collection service from. Essex is the disposal authority for all councils. We are the collection authority, just to put that in context. And we have for 6 years been speaking to Essex County Council about the recycling centre, about looking to work with them because they are the landowner there for the recycling centre. But they don't have any budget to do anything, and that's why they haven't taken it forward. So it's not for the want of conversations, they just don't have the appetite, so they have no budget. So we have had those conversations, again, just to put that in context. And in fact, I was in a meeting not that long ago where it was discussed with my opposite number and officers, but they were clearly saying we just don't have any budget to, buy land, move things around, put new entrances in. Essex doesn't have the money. It's really that straightforward. In terms of the changes here, we have allowed Essex County Council, obviously, sight of this. They are aware. And one of the suggestions that's come up during the recent COVID crisis was to actually put cameras broadcasting queues onto the website for Essex to allow residents to actually know when the site is actually quiet. And Essex are looking to do that to improve communication to ensure that people don't turn up at the busiest period. So it is also about using technology and communicating with residents to ensure that they try and use them during the quieter periods. So that is something Essex have taken on board and is on their backlog, to use an IT term, as I'm in IT, as you know, to get their web developers to actually do that to help. In terms of helping the lowest earners, etc., as I've said, Colchester is the only local authority, or one of very few, that actually have built into this to allow discounts or free sign up where obviously people are on certain benefits, and the details of that will come out. Again, as I say, also to help, we allow quarterly direct debit, where again, the majority of councils just want you to pay up front and that's it, right? So for a lot of people, a bit like buying your house insurance, pay it monthly or quarterly. We're not going to add interest to it. We're not going to add extra charges. You know, again, we're trying to be as flexible as we can in what are difficult and unprecedented circumstances, and to be better than other local authorities where we are, you know, who've gone down the charging route. As I say, some have done it for 15, 20 years. So this is new for Colchester, but we're trying to do it better and make it as affordable as we can.
Thank you very much indeed. Councillor McCarthy, did you want to come back? Are you happy with that for the moment?
No, very happy with that. Thank you, Councillor
All
Garson.
right, okay. Councillor Bourne, are you in a go position, or would you like to come back and wait a bit longer? You were on mute.
Yes, sorry. Yes, I've got a couple of questions.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Goss. I do appreciate that any portfolio holder that's going to come to scrutiny now about changes to their services that they run in their portfolio is going to face an enormous amount of scrutiny at the moment. You're the first one up, and I think we will see a succession of other portfolio holders doing the same, and that's replicated across the country. I think you have done a fair job in standing up for your portfolio and the things that you are trying to achieve. Is it fair to say that those you mentioned that collection of garden waste is a non-statutory service that the council can you recall when Colchester Borough Council went to this service from not collecting green waste? Can you do that first of all? And then the other thing I wanted to ask you about was those who are already taking their garden waste to the tip, those who are already composting or paying up, and those without gardens already paying for this service, whether they use it or not. And it's sort, you could almost use the double taxation argument for that. So I mean, I have to say that I have seen all the distress on social media, but I have to say that in my inbox, it has been relatively little. I can think of other things in Colchester that have happened where it has provoked a flurry of emails to councillors, and this isn't one of them, predominantly because most people I represent do not have gardens, or they live in flats, or they have a very small garden they're already composting. So there's an element of fairness here. The upper quartile performance, Colchester Borough Council used to be quite poor on our performance for recycling, and is improved exponentially in recent years. So I think that's good. I think if there's something, Councillor Goss, that you wanted to drop from this proposal, what would it be?
Good questions. I can't phone a friend, and I can't do 50-50. So in terms of garden waste, when did we first start picking it up for free? Well, from memory, I'll have to go back and check the archives. I mean, we've been running this service for decades with Hesse and Sachs, you know, over 20 years from memory. And I moved to Colchester in 1978 when I was 4, and I remember recycling coming in when my dad was a councillor in Prettygate. So we've been doing it for, you know, well over 20 years plus, at least. if not longer. So many decades we've been doing garden recycling, and we have been doing it free, and over those decades obviously more and more councils have been charging. As I say, we're now in the minority. In terms of people using the service, well, it's quite clear. If you drive or walk or cycle down a street or skateboard or whatever you do to get around, you will see that not every household puts garden rubbish out every couple of weeks. Some do, many don't. And you can see that even in the peak seasons. So not everyone uses the existing service regularly. Some of that will be because they've already landscaped their gardens. If you're going to landscape your garden, you're going to landscape your garden. And therefore you may keep it very low maintenance so that you don't actually have to do much work in it. You enjoy it rather than work in it, whereas other people do lots of work and get exercise and produce a higher level of garden waste, which they do tend to compost as well. If there was one thing I'd like to drop from this proposal, well, I'd like to kick out the charges, frankly, because, you know, for me, this is a very difficult introduction. You ask me an honest question, I'll give you an honest answer, as I do to anyone that's emailed me or asked me on Facebook. If I could, I wouldn't be introducing this charge. I do think the introduction of the wheelie bins to this service is absolutely a positive step forwards in terms of you know, reducing the cost on Hessium sacks that disappear, and also, of course, to ensure that our staff are off with less injuries as well, because, you know, we do have to support our staff in this as well. And where wheelie bins have come out, including in my own ward, which I have to say I was filled with trepidation when they did. And I remember one estate in particular where we as 3 ward councillors had quite a big row about it, and we ended up going to a vote, and I voted against, the other 2 voted in favour, and it actually worked really, really well because it was a very tight estate. And we never get complaints in it. And the adage about once people get wheelie bins, they really like them is absolutely true, because we do not get complaints about wheelie bins in Mile End or other parts of Colchester where they've been rolled out. People do like them. And there are still thousands of properties that we are aware of that would not be suitable for wheelie bins. You know, there's areas of Newtown, there's areas like the Dutch Quarter, where we wouldn't even think about putting wheelie bins, and we'll obviously keep an existing bag-based system that is appropriate for those areas. But what that does do is mean the vast majority of garden waste collections would be made by wheelie bins. So I hope that answers your question.
Thank you very much indeed. Could we go to Councillor Whitehead now, please? Oh, sorry, Councillor Ball, was there any more? I beg your pardon. Was there any more?
Yes, please, Chair.
Sorry.
For those people with wheelie bins, you say interestingly, Councillor Goss, that you've noticed a change, and maybe you were sceptical in the past for wheelie bins yourself, that you haven't had any comeback from residents who had the that method of collection introduced. If you were going to be with these proposals in introducing this waste collection service, you talked about transforming, you're already looking at transforming the waste collection service. Should we not have had COVID? Should we not have suffered financially like all the local authorities have recently? When were you looking to do that previously? And is that the only reason why you've brought this type of transformation forward?
So it's a good question, and as we know, there was a petition put on the Colchester Borough website not that long ago about asking us to look at wheelie bins again, and I certainly know other ward councillors have come to me on a regular basis to say that their residents do want wheelie bins. So there is an increased interest in this, particularly where there are issues where people put black sacks out and they get attacked by foxes, etc. And there's always rubbish all over the roads and pavements. So there's an ongoing interest in the waste collection service, and whether we look at it again. So at some point in the future, I'm sure the conversation will have been had again with council officers and ward councillors and residents to see whether they wished to move to wheeled bins again, because certainly where it's been done, it's been very successful. And as I say, 83% of councils use some form of wheeled bin. So again, Colchester is in the minority where obviously the predominance of the delivery of service is still with black sacks and white hessian sacks, etc. So certainly it's been successful. What I'd be against, I have to be frank, I would not be in favour of commingling with wheelie bins, because that is proven to be less environmentally friendly. So, you know, it's like everything in life, there's always a conversation to be had to re-look at old decisions and to refresh the way service is delivered to bring it, you know, fully into the 21st century.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Let's move on to Councillor Whitehead. Any questions?
Thank you, Chair. And yes, thank you to Councillor Goss and Councillor King for the presentations. And I think Councillor King's presentation was really very helpful. Those figures are really stark, I think, and really show the scale of the challenge that that's facing councils at the moment. And I think that I wonder, first of all, maybe if we need to do a little bit more to help our residents to understand a bit of that, because I think actually when it comes to these sorts of decisions which are likely to be coming down the line, I think residents will understand when they understand the scale of the challenge facing us, that some of these things are difficult choices that are going to have to be made. And I think probably there's some work to do around making sure that our residents understand the scale of the issue as well. And I certainly don't think we shouldn't be a council that's cutting environmental inspections or home disability adaptations or voluntary grants or locality funding or all of those things in the presentation from Councillor King. I mean, there's absolutely a range of options that I certainly think we shouldn't be taking in response to the kind of the necessary situation that we're in. I do think one of the benefits of this policy, which I think shouldn't be overlooked, and is in the report, is the benefits to staff health. The significant number of fewer sick days for staff who are working with wheel bins rather than bags, and I think that is a very important thing to recognise. Actually, staff that are working over a long period of time, moving very heavy sacks of waste week after week. I think the long-term effect of that, if there are ways for us to mitigate that, I think that's actually a very valuable thing for us to do. In terms of things I'd like to know a little bit more about, it's obviously come up a couple of times already around the issue of concessions and how that will be structured. I know you mentioned that information is to come. Do we have any idea when we will know a bit more about what concessions will be available, which types of residents and which types of benefits might be eligible for them, and what those concessions might be? It would be good to know when that information might be available. I know in the report it says that there's intended to be discounts around the initial fee, but I wonder if there's any intention to have any discount around the annual fee as well for residents who are finding it harder to pay. I'd be interested to know about that. And is there any possibility, or was it considered the possibility of alongside the new measures having the option of one-off collections paid for by residents to order? I mean, there may well be people out there who, they have a big clear out once a year in the summertime, and they chop a lot of stuff back, and they only need one or two collections in the summertime because they're not avid gardeners, but they do need to deal with that waste, and they also find it difficult to take that to the tip themselves. So I wonder if that's something that could be done on an ad hoc basis, paid for to cover its own costs. And I think I'll leave it there for now.
Thank you, Councillor Whitehead. Councillor Goss, some responses to those, please.
Yeah, no problem. So I'll start with the last question first. Yes, it is something that I've asked officers to consider, where we potentially may have a freighter service that is chargeable, similar to some degree where we sent out prior to the garden waste and recycling service fully coming back online where people could go to Leisure World, etc., to drop off garden waste. But it is something we're looking at possibly as a service. Obviously, there's a balance to be had, and what the charge might be, and volume, and etc. So it is something extra. Again, other local authorities don't even consider doing that. You pay for the service that you get, and that is it. So again, Colchester is trying in difficult circumstances to look at being innovative, to just try and add as much value back into this as we can. In terms of concessions, well, there is one thing to remember, and it hasn't necessarily come up. Colchester only gets 12p out of every pound that you pay in your council tax, because the most payments go to Essex, the police authority, fire service, and if you've got a town or parish council, they obviously take a slice as well. So that is just worth remembering that, you know, Band D property in Colchester is 190 quid a year, and actually when I had a look the other day, I think the police authority actually gets more than Colchester does now, because they've had massive increments in the last couple of years to make up for government cuts. In terms of when the detail will be available on the benefits that certainly will allow it, I think certainly people on local council tax support will be included in that, and also as well people getting income support as well. So that's already been modelled and looked at. Rory might be able to give a bit more detail, but that's kind of where we're thinking on that. Again, this is new territory, because as I say, most councils do not help. I think there's also been some language in the press, and maybe from some councillors, that might not be helpful, where it's been called a garden tax. So in other words, because I've got a garden, I've got a tax. I think you know, I can see why people might say that, but at the end of the day, your council tax isn't necessarily paying for you to have waste collected from your garden now. I've just explained that Colchester gets very little of the, you know, thousands of pounds that people pay, you know, and what people do forget is whatever happens, we as councillors are residents, and, you know, I pay council tax. If I subscribe to this service, then I have to pay it, just like my dad will or my brother if they subscribe. So this is serious stuff. This is affecting people that I know, friends I know, family, fellow councillors. So this is not an easy decision to be asked to look at, but that's why I welcome the scrutiny and actually put it back on all of you, because if you don't like this proposition, I can't say I'm particularly pleased with having to look at it either, frankly. You can pick that up. I've been straight about that with people. Then come up with the answers then, right? Some people have said remove all councillor allowances. Fine, let's do that. Let's get rid of all allowances, right? Let's cut the locality budgets. Let's wipe all that out. That's hundreds of thousands of pounds we could save. If you're not up for this, well, I'm up for that then. That is the challenge back on scrutiny. If you don't like this, then come up with the answers. Answer a different exam question. So I just thought I'd put that challenge back, and I hope that answers your questions, Lorcan.
Yes, thank you, Richard. Any more, Councillor Whitehead?
Yes, thank you. That's very helpful. And yes, just one more award-specific question. It's already come up that there are areas in Newtown that are unsuitable for wheeled bins, and I just would wonder if, while I've got you, if you can give me an on-the-record GOS guarantee that it's not going to be imposed on any areas of Newtown that it wouldn't be suitable in.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's bits of Mile End that I've already said, you know, they weren't suitable before when they were looked at. They're not going to be suitable now. You know, steps haven't suddenly disappeared. Residents haven't got any younger in those areas. So again, the same framework will be applied. I mean, give you an example of Mile End Road, okay? That's got a split service on it. The bottom bit of Mile End Road is still black sack and white Hessian sacks. And as you go up the road, because there's less steps and less slopes, that's where wheeled bins have been introduced. And that's how they split the service, and it's worked. So you can, even on a road like, I mean, I'll pick Old Heath Road, I'm just picking a long road. It could be that some of the houses are suitable and some of them are not. Obviously, we're trying to get the service as generic as possible, but that's just a prime example of where a road in my own ward has been split to suit the service and suit the residents. So you do have a GOS guarantee there that I will certainly scrutinise anywhere and everywhere where wheeled bins are suggested, but also ensure that local knowledge is used, and I will push back hard. because I do believe in being absolutely fair to residents that, you know, if you've got a load of steps or a huge slope, you shouldn't have a wheelie bin imposed on you. That said, other authorities have rolled wheelie bins out to entire towns where, of course, they do have those challenges. They do have an equivalent Dutch quarter. Again, in Colchester, we've been much kinder and tried to be as flexible as we can.
Thank you. I would just say I understand the passion, but the job of scrutiny is to scrutinise decisions. If we just set policy, it would be the cabinet. So, and we will be helpful as we possibly can. Now, it is 8 o'clock. I'm going to propose, because we're people working hard here and asking questions and all that, that we have a 10-minute break and come back, and then I'll pick up the questioning with Councillor Barber, Councillor Hogg and Councillor Dundas. It gives a chance for people to perhaps have a cup of coffee or a walk around and just get away from the screen for 10 minutes. So let's resume then at 10 minutes. And Owen, could you please stop the recording?
Yes, Councillor. Just to note that we will continue the meeting on through, but Richard will display the adjournment meeting. So if everyone could make sure they've muted and turned off their videos, then that should keep us safe.
Right, do we have people back yet at all, please? Owen, hello.
Hello, Mr. Chairman.
I've just had a message from Councillor Barber. I think he logged out completely, so I've just reminded him the meeting is now. Can you get him back in, by any chance?
Right, yes, we'll unlock the meeting, Mr. Chairman, and then he should be able to rejoin.
Okay, thank you. May I just, welcome back everyone. May I just check we've got all the panel members with the exception of Councillor Barber, who's making his way slowly back into the virtual meeting. We've got Councillor Whitehead, Councillor Bourne, Councillor McCarthy, Councillor Dundas, Councillor Hogg, Councillor Hayter, me. Yeah, so it's just Councillor Barber, but we know where he is. Right. May I just check that the meeting is now recording and being streamed on YouTube, please, before we resume?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, we're live on YouTube, and I will just double check. Yes, the feed is coming through loud and clear.
Lovely, thank you. So while we wait for Councillor Barber, I was going to him next, but let's go to Councillor Dundas, then Councillor Hogg, then Councillor Barber. So Councillor Dundas, please.
Thank you, Chair. I've been promoted by one. That's all good fun. I'm going to try and just try and stick to asking some questions about the paper which is actually in front of us, because that's after all what we're actually considering as a panel tonight. Councillor Whitehead has actually already raised a couple of issues I was going to, particularly around the defining who has defined people on certain benefits are. And I interpret it the same way as he does in paragraph 8.13, that any discount will only be for the sign-up fee. And as far as I can read it, everybody will be paying the £50 annual charge. So that's perhaps, I just would like that clarified, but I think that's what the report said, and I think that's what Councillor Goss said, in fairness, in reply to Councillor Whitehead. I also just really want to try and clarify the exact finances of the whole scheme. Then paragraph 3.2, it puts the cost of current collections around £1 million. And then we go to paragraph 9.12, which details basically the business plan for the new service. And that says it should deliver a profit of 1.126 million in financial year 21-22. So if you look at it on the face of that, that is an overall saving of just over £2 million. But when you actually look at the business plan on 9.12, we haven't actually got any costs of providing the service in there. And we haven't actually broken down what our fixed and variable costs are. You know, how elastic are our costs in relation to the take up of the scheme? So I can't really see how any councillor trying to scrutinise it can actually see where the break-even point is or what risk is attached to not obtaining the 50% take up. It's a bit sort of like Netflix saying, well, this is my business plan. We get £8 a month. These are all our costs of our internet costs, but we haven't actually put any costs for making or buying programs in. So I just really want to clarify exactly what the business plan is and what our overall costs are. Also on the capital requirements, which is section 14, it says the purchase of an additional vehicle and bins. But when we look at the table, it only mentions purchase of bins and adaptation of 8 vehicles. So where is the additional vehicle? What is its cost? And why isn't it in the table? Obviously, if that vehicle is a cost, then that affects our capital depreciation costs, which we've got in as the MRP. I just want to know, there are 4 methods of MRP you can use. I just want to check which one we are actually using. I'm guessing we're probably using asset life or conventional accounting depreciation. It seems to depreciate the cost over about 7 years, which seems fair to me. I think a lot have been the last 7 years, possibly a vehicle does as well, but I'd like that clarified. On paragraph 8.2, we talk about feedback from other authorities. Can we state which authorities the feedback is from? And can we see the details? And it would be interesting to know what the take-up is from tendering, simply because they seem to have an identical charge to what we are proposing, £25 sign-up fee, £50 per year. So what is the take-up in percentage terms in tendering? Councillor Lissamore raised the possibility of extra fly tipping, so I'd be interested to know if any recurring expenditure has been allocated to increase neighbourhood services costs for clearing that up. I'd also like to know, and I think this is perhaps also something Councillor Goach and Councillor Lissamore brought up, what studies have we done to say what we think extra carbon emissions will be from people driving to the recycling centre? And if we're working on the assumption that there is a 50% take up of the service, now the vehicles are presumably going to have to do pretty much full rounds as they're doing now. In other words, whether the take up is 25% or 100%, if you've got a collection at number 2 and at number 30 at the end of the road, the vehicle still has to drive exactly the same distance. So if you're looking at 50% take up, my basic math says that our emissions per kilogram of collected green waste will be double what they are now, because you've got the same vehicles driving the same distance, but only collecting half the waste. So I'm not quite sure how that fits in with our climate emergency. And I think also a point Councillor Scott Butell made, actually. Now, it's generally accepted that residents get their council tax bill in March. Some of them pay it then. Not everybody pays over the 10 months. And they have a general expectation of, once they've paid that we as a council have stated what services they will get in return for that, which is why we tend to make major changes on a year-on-year financial basis. Now, notwithstanding, I know these are exceptional circumstances, and I know it's a very strange year, but I just want to know whether councillors, if you're concerned that by dropping or charging for a service residents have been expecting to receive as part of what they'd already paid in March or April, you are to a certain extent breaking a bit of a bond of trust between the council and council taxpayers, and how you make that feel and what effect you think that will probably have on the relationship between us and our residents. That's all I've got for the time being.
Thank you, Councillor Dundas. Councillor Goss.
Thank you. I'll answer some of those points, and then I'll let Rory and Rosa do some of the detail around the finances, because obviously they've been involved at the detail. So let me take some of those questions. So first question you asked, Paul, was around the discount. Yes, that is currently sitting on the sign-up fee if somebody is on certain benefits, etc. You are right, that is in the report. You then asked about finances in 3.2, about fixed and variable costs, and also about vehicles in 8.2. The vehicles, we're not buying any new vehicles. The 8 vehicles that are mentioned, it's adaptation costs, where currently they don't have the bin lift, so they'll just have the bin lift added. So there's no actual new vehicles. If you recall, we spent £4 million on buying new waste vehicles last year to replace the old fleet. It was more cost effective to purchase than to lease. Obviously this changes over time, but that was obviously done, so that there are no new vehicles. Extra fly tipping costs, I'll let the officers give you some further detail, but as I say, when we've spoken to other local authorities, there's not a huge increase in fly tipping. Initially, there was a very slight increase, and we've actually got our own figures of fly tipping over the last 3 months compared to last year, when people may think they had an excuse to when we had a reduced waste collection service. And again, they did not increase hugely. Even that local evidence is there, but there is evidence from other authorities. We've talked about carbon emissions. Again, I'll let the officers give you a bit more detail on that. And then the last question on council tax. Well, under the Environment Act, councils are allowed to choose whether they charge or not for garden waste services, because obviously it's a non-mandatory service according to government. That's why 65% of councils do charge it. And again, councils are permitted under the Environment Act to actually choose what receptacles are used for collection. Hence why most have opted for wheelie bins. I guess 83% of councils do wheelie bins. So in that respect, council tax, doesn't officially cover the service, because obviously it's a non-mandatory collection. But the officers can give you more detail on some of those questions. I've just given you some headline and some examples, but I'll let Roy and Rosa come in, and maybe Dan as well, just to give you a bit more detail.
Thank you. One of the three officers who'd like to pick up the... Yeah, please.
Hi, good evening. So I'll try and work through some of those points raised by Councillor Dundas, and I may pick up on some of the points raised by colleagues as well. So in terms of costs and finances, with regard to MRP, Councillor Dundas, it's calculated over the lifetime of the equipment. So that's 10 years for bins, and that's 7 years for vehicles. In terms of the finances and the capital spend, that will be proportionate to take up. So obviously, in terms of building a prudent business case, we've set out what we believe is a reasonable expectation around take up. We've projected a 50% take up. I think built into the business case is a 60% provision in terms of capital, but as I think we've touched on, that will be proportionate to take up. We will be undertaking an expressions of interest exercise to gauge opinion from residents, and we'll soon get an understanding in a bit more detail in terms of what that take up will look like. Lots been mentioned in terms of benchmarking. So we've had a conversation with lots of other authorities, and Rose has been doing that directly. So I know we've spoken to Malden, Tendring, West Suffolk, Castle Point. We've got some ongoing conversations with other places outside of Essex in terms of Bexley, Peterborough, who have implemented similar schemes. Whilst the benchmarking has been really useful, because as explained, this isn't uncharted territory really. A lot of councils have implemented similar schemes. However, they all start from slightly different places. So to use Tendring as an example, Tendring, before implementing their paid for service, weren't offering a curbside collection for free. So their starting point was somewhat different. I believe from the conversations we've had, and I'm sure Rosa will pick up on the detail, that it's been well received in Tendring. I think, if you excuse the pun, it's grown quite organically there in terms of the take up. Whilst it's, like I say, it's difficult to compare like with like, but the officers there have advised that what they didn't undertake was a particularly robust marketing or comms campaign of the like we will take up here. I'm just looking at in terms of the numbers of take up, so bear with me. So in Tendring, I think they're looking at, I think they've got about 13,000 customers at the moment signed up, and I believe they've got more on a waiting list. But of course, as I say, it's like comparing apples with pears, really. They're starting from a very different point than us. There were some points there, Councillor Dundas, about routes. We will be undertaking a route optimisation exercise to ensure that the routes are as efficient and effective as they can be. That's something we will keep under continual review throughout. So it's something that's not going to stand still, and will ensure that we can deliver the service as efficiently and effective as possible. In terms of the business case, so you've already touched on there the cost of delivering the service, which are approximately just over £1 million as is. As I think's already been touched on, moving forward, we're moving in a direction where the income generated from the fees will be what pays for the service. So the cost in that sense won't be to the general council taxpayer, which of course includes many vulnerable people too. Was there any, have I missed any key points there, Councillor Dundas, before perhaps I bring Rosa in?
No, I think just my general view was well, firstly on the vehicle, the report actually says in paragraph 9.14, and I'm reading it verbatim. The capital expenditure requirements of the proposals will include the cost of the purchase of bins and an additional vehicle. So I'm just reading what the report says. So if we're not purchasing an additional vehicle, the report is wrong. That would be my comment. I mean, I'm not happy to admit there's obviously been a human error there, but that's what it says. So I can agree with what the report says.
So I can confirm. So on that point, it's not. We are not purchasing an additional vehicle. So we can correct that error in the paper, and we can pick that up and make sure that's.
For me, just as the chairman, because I think accuracy is very important when we're meant to be reviewing documents. First of all, how did that get in there? That's a bit of a substantial error, isn't it? And secondly, what does that do to the costs then?
So I don't believe the costs in terms of an additional vehicle are in the business case. That's obviously a typo in the narrative.
I would say, Mr. Wall, it's a bit more than a typo. A typo is a misspelling. That's a definite statement. And we're saying it's not true. Is that correct? Just so we're absolutely clear, there's no additional vehicle, and that is incorrect.
So there will be no additional vehicle if we move to the provision of the service in this way.
Okay, I think we've made that very clear, and this needs to be rewritten before it goes to cabinet. Then I would say.
Agree, Chairman. Just to be clear, what will be occurring in terms of vehicles is vehicle adaptation to existing vehicles. So just clarifying that point.
Thank you.
Mr. Dundas, sorry, I interrupted there. Sorry.
No, that's fine. And I think on the table that on the business case as we're describing it, we've got our table 9.12, which says our income, and says our expenditure. I just find it really strange when we're looking at it as a business case that in our expenditure, the one thing we haven't got is the cost of picking up any waste, which would seem a fairly fundamental thing when it's a waste picking up service. So I just think for councillors looking at it and trying to look at the bottom line as to this is our income, this is our expenditure, it's not very clear. If you write a business case, you write all your income, you write all your expenditure, and we haven't got the main thing we're actually doing in there as an expenditure. So you must admit that is a slightly strange way to present it. And I think it's quite confusing for councillors because it implies that the profit this year is 420,000 and the profit next year is 1.126 million. That is not profit from the scheme because you haven't got the cost. I mean, it might be revenue neutral, which is fine. In actual fact, that would be an easier thing for councillors to go out and sell. So, I mean, you might have missed a trick there. But, it doesn't make 1.126 million. It might affect the council bottom line by 1.126 million, but that isn't a business case. A business case is what a particular activity costs or makes. So I think it's a misleading table. On tendering, you say that there are 13,000 customers in tendering. So how many properties are there in tendering? So as a percentage, what is that?
So I'll pick up on the first point, if I may, Councillor Dundas. So I think the business case sets out the revenue implications of the change. Yeah. So the costs in terms of our cost for delivering the service are already in the budget. What the business case sets out is the implications of the change and the additional costs of delivering the service. In terms of tendering's population, I believe it's in the region of 140,000 households. But as I say, it's difficult to derive a comparison there because what they were starting from is a very different proposition. They had no collection service. They haven't gone through a marketing or comms campaign in advertising that service either. What I would add is that we're looking at comparable places where they have gone from a free service to a charged for service. And as you'd appreciate, there's a spectrum in terms of take up, but there's reassurance from other places that have done it that 30, 40, 50% in the region of what we predicted is a robust estimate, and we can have confidence in that. Does that answer your question?
Well, it does, but that's a take up of 9.3% from a neighbouring authority charging exactly the same as we're charging. So it is a fair jump from 9.3% to 50%, just saying that we can market it better.
Sorry, that was a wrong figure. I think that was the population that Rory...
Oh, sorry, the population. So yeah, it does sound very low to me.
Yeah, that's incorrect. I can double check what the household is in tendering in terms of population. It would be smaller. We are a bigger borough. But I'll dip out. We can probably find those facts for sure. I didn't want you to be misled.
Thank you. And I suppose then from I get that it's the revenue or the impact on the budget. So my final question then, in terms of take up, what is our break-even point?
So based on the projections that we have, I think we need in the region of 25% take up in terms of residents to break even. I think there's lots of nuances to this though, and I think it may be a key point to point out. So a reduction overall in the people using the service doesn't necessarily, because I think it came up earlier around volumes of waste, it doesn't necessarily correlate that the same can be said for the reduction in waste produced overall. Certainly in other places that we've spoken to, the people that continue to use the service are probably the ones that use it most regularly. And therefore, there hasn't been a considerable decrease actually in the volumes of green waste being collected in many of those places. So it indicates perhaps that the people who are using it once in a while or once in a blue moon may be the residents that don't take up the offer of the service moving forward. And the residents that do choose to pay are the ones making regular use of the service as is, and will continue to do so in the future.
No, I get that. It's just, we have to look at it that if we're looking at it as a revenue improving scheme, then we have to ensure it actually does that and doesn't actually end up costing money in effect. Because there is, with any scheme which is being run on a commercial basis, and to some extent we're running this on a commercial basis, there is that danger. And I think councillors need to be aware of that possibility and need to know where that point is and what danger there is there. But thank you for your answers.
Councillor Dundas, thank you very much indeed. Was there any other officer wishes to comment before we move on to Councillor Hogg? Let's move to Councillor Hogg then. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Whilst we're on the subject of populations and local authorities, I have concerns, particularly as I've just heard that the expected take-up will be 25%. On 9.7, 9.8 in the report, it says garden waste income based on take-up. My concerns over that would be, and I'd like a response on this, none of the other local authorities that have been involved and rolled their programme out, quite obviously haven't been rolling out a programme during the middle of a COVID-19 pandemic and a rising unemployment register. That obviously is going to have an impact on what we do and how people respond to what we're offering. Do you have any thoughts on that?
In terms of income, I'll let Rory answer that. And I think it's a fair challenge to put the lens across it of a pandemic, because obviously it's in uncharted territory, and it's actually because of the pandemic we're looking at this, as we explained earlier. And of course, other councils, as I've mentioned, have been running this service or this income stream for 10, 15, 20 years. So there will be comparable business cases where potentially councils have started this, and then a recession may well have started. So 2008 would be a good example where nobody suddenly predicted the crash. And some councils will have implemented garden waste charges. Obviously, we can look at that as a comparator to COVID-19 to a degree. It's not direct, but there is a correlation because we are going to be in uncharted, choppy economic times. So there will be recessionary times where councils will have introduced this income stream. So we can look at that in more detail, but I think it's a fair lens to put across it. But I'll let Rory answer in a bit more detail on 9.7, 9.8 on the income and any other views he's got.
Thank you.
So to clarify a few points in terms of uptake and its impact on our income projections. So overall, we are projecting a 50% uptake by season 4 of the rollout. So we've phased our approach to that. So we're projecting at the moment a 25% uptake at launch during season 1, an additional 12.5% at season 2, an additional 12.5% at season 3, bringing us hopefully to what we believe will be a baseline level in uptake at season 4, which is April 2022 onwards, just to clarify that point. In terms of the lens of the current COVID impact, interestingly, what we have seen from other local authorities is they're actually seeing inquiries for their paid for service increase. We're seeing high levels, I'm sure you'll appreciate, of activation within communities around their connection to green space, the value they place on it. More people are spending time in their gardens and have done. So actually many places are reporting an increase in inquiries at the moment rather than a decrease. But obviously this is these difficult circumstances, but certainly that's some of the insight we've gained from elsewhere.
Thank you very much. No more questions, Chairman.
Thank you. May I just bring in, before I bring in Councillor Barber, I want to clear something up in terms of language. This 25% of 9.8, which Councillor Hogg referred to and has been mentioned before, it says of eligible residents. It's eligible households, isn't it? Not residents. If you count 25 residents, you get 4 in a house.
So my apologies, to clarify, it's households.
Yes, so again, I think for the sake of accuracy, we just have to get this right in the papers and sort of before it goes to. Thank you. Sorry, Councillor Barber.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Goss, for the report. I just want to pick up first and foremost, before getting on to the substance of the debate, just about the percentage of authorities that continued their waste service throughout the pandemic, because Councillor Goss said that there was a piece of misinformation. I'm more than happy for him to provide him with the surveys from the LGA, DEFRA, and a variety of organisations in the industry that have been weekly surveys of local authorities on their waste surveys, which show between 97% and 78% of authorities, depending on how you define it, continued their service without any changes. So I'll make sure that I send those to Councillor Goss after the meeting so he can see the figures that were cited in the councillor submissions earlier. On to the main questions I have on the matter. I think they have been touched on so far, but certainly they're leading really to more questions coming out of it. For instance, it was sort of just skirted over there, but the issue about the percentage take up in tendering, I really think actually we need to understand that a bit better. It's not just something to take away. This is a decision that is in theory going to be made tomorrow evening. And I think we can't just say, oh, well, actually, we got it wrong, households, residents, we just got it wrong. That is a substantial part of understanding the reason that the administration is proposing these charges is to raise a sufficient level of income, is their argument. However, whether I want it to be introduced or not, that won't actually affect the percentage take up. That will be based on a variety of factor inputs. So if we're getting those inputs wrong, if we're basing them on assumptions that are just wrong, then we could have produced a report that will be way off the mark in the income provided, will have negative environmental impacts by increased driving or bonfires or however it's disposed of. And we won't have raised the income that has been purported in the report to be raised anywhere across the 4-year period. So the actual objective that is cited by the administration may never be realised because of flawed assumptions in the first place. And that is my worry from the discussion that I've heard so far this evening, is that some of the figures that have been cited, well, they're either not particularly relevant because there was a comparison to authorities who are actually predominantly rural anyway. So arguably there'd be more people with gardens who would be producing garden waste. Authorities that have for a long period had garden waste charges in place anyway, so people will have budgeted for it. One of the points that's already been raised is actually this is going to be a new charge for people during a period of economic contraction. So the last thing people will want would be an additional charge compared to, say, in better economic times. They may be more responsive to that. So I want to understand how we've modelled that into the data, if at all possible, to reflect the economic reality that we're in. And also just to really see if any other authorities have introduced this charge, as you said, back in 2008 when there was an economic recession. So whether we are actually comparing properly the economic circumstance. And I don't think we've really done that from what I've heard so far this evening. And I think that sort of work needs to be done before approving it, because otherwise we could end up being introducing garden waste charges now and then having to introduce all of the extra charges that have been cited already in this report later on as well, because of the fact that it just didn't raise the funds that the administration hoped it would. Anyway, and that's a reality point rather than any of my personal views on the charges anyway, just understanding how some of these figures have got to in the first place. My worry is we found a number that we wanted to raise and we've made the report fit to do that, just to say that the budget is balanced. From the information that's been provided this evening, hearing some of the points raised, I mean, the tendering point was quite alarming. And can you just confirm that isn't the case, and just to understand some of the inputs you put in a bit more anyway? But I thought the stuff that Councillor King raised was really useful, but it's a shame that we've only got it in a way before a meeting on quite a substantial change to policy. In my view, looking at what I've heard this evening, it would be beneficial to have a wider debate about the council's finances, to discuss options. I mean, Councillor King has specified some options. I mean, I wouldn't say they're particularly desirable at all, but certainly to understand exactly the point of the council's finances right now and what needs to be done. And I think that would have some merit as well. So, and Councillor Goss, also, you said, you sort of put it back on us. Well, I think that's a welcome challenge in a way. Maybe let's take it to full council and have the resolution there so we can have the debate and discussion about the finances of the council and the opportunity costs of certain decisions. So I think looking at what I've heard this evening and the report is some of the factor inputs that have been put in. I'd like some clarification on that, because we seem way off the mark. I mean, we can't just skirt over the fact that we may have got households and residents wrong, because that's quite a substantial change. We'd actually only get to the 50% mark comparing to tendering if we assumed 4 people in a household in tendering based on the population numbers. Well, I would be very surprised if every household had 4 people on average in tendering. Plus it's a rural district as well. So I really think that, to be honest, a better report would need to be produced to justify the arguments put forward in this paper. I think there's some significant gaps that require more time, and I think this has been a bit rushed through within sort of a week, and that's reflected even on simple things like mistakes in the report. I mean, quite substantial mistakes. We've already picked up a couple this evening in the discussion. It just doesn't seem ready yet to present for decision, and that can lead to more problems down the line. Again, that's not even based on whether I think we should do it or not. That's just kind of basic decision making, it would seem to me. And one question I do have, if the government does provide additional money to the council, that does mean we are in a better financial position. Will you then scrap this proposal and not have it? It's sort of a simple yes or no question on that one. If not, why not? If the argument is for income raising, if yes, then I think that some further discussions will need to be had across the chamber anyway. So I think they were some of the main points. I think Councillor Costa has almost tried a sort of a recommendation himself, is take it to full council, I guess. But it's certainly worthy of wider debate. And I think the rushing of the report, again, to this point, is reflected in the fact there's a lot of flaws in the income assumption. I mean, I have my personal views on it, but I think that's serious deficiencies in the proposals that have come forward to scrutiny this evening.
Barbara, thank you. There's lots of comment and question there. Just for the sake of helping everyone, could you just clarify the questions you'd like answered?
One, the inputs of the modelling about the income uptake and how we've modelled that and what we're comparing to. Have we looked at other economic recessions when they were introduced to ensure that it's a sufficient like for like? 2, will you scrap the charges if the government do announce further funds to cover the income, as one of the arguments is about the lost funding? 3 is whether you would have an open discussion to consider the alternatives, because I think that's important because of the presentation that Councillor King gave this evening. And the other issue, sorry, was the engagement with ward councillors on their choice of wheelie bins, because certain wards have been picked out, but my ward and others that are rural have rejected wheelie bins numerous times, and whether you're going to have those engagements with councillors, because I think that's important if you're going to introduce wheelie bins to the ward, to make sure that, because I haven't had any comment as a ward councillor, and I know other ward councillors haven't. So you sort of picked a few wards, and I'm wondering why those particular wards compared to maybe some of the rural ones. So that'd be my final question on that.
Thank you. Councillor Goss, please.
Yeah, thank you. I did wonder where the questions were, so thanks for stating that. Just a couple of points from me, actually. When obviously we're scrutinising the paper tonight, and it doesn't actually talk about particularly about percentages of councils that stop the service, but any information, statistics and dam statistics and all the rest of it. But
I think, to be fair, it was a response to your comment, I think, so that's perfectly fine. Carry on then.
So in terms of the question, we haven't introduced the charge, so we can't actually scrap something we've not actually introduced. This is a discussion paper that is obviously at scrutiny. If the finances suddenly change and government obviously helps all councils out, then of course, different decisions will be taken. The decision on this hasn't actually been taken. And you heard me say it earlier, Tina asked me what would I change, and I say remove the charge. So you've got an answer in that, but at the moment we haven't taken a decision. We're scrutinising this paper, and obviously this is going to Cabinet tomorrow night. We're not at that meeting yet. We don't know what is going to happen. Rory can cover off some of the financial modelling, and I think we've been clear that Rory meant residents rather than households. I believe that tendering is around 48 to 50,000 households, which means the take up would be about 25 to 27%, which is about on par with what the paper actually did say, and that was the minimum figure that obviously we wanted to achieve. So I believe that answers that question, but I'll let Rory pick up the rest of the detail.
Thank you. Mr. Doyle, please.
So yeah, just to pick up on Councillor Goss's point there, referring back to our own model. So we currently have approximately 70,000 households that we deliver a garden waste service to. So our modelling is based on a 50% uptake from those households. With tendering, as I think I said, they started with a customer base of 0. So they weren't offering a service previously. And without any significant marketing or communications campaign, they're now serving 13,000 households. So just to clarify the differences between the two areas. So whilst it's useful clearly to benchmark and to gain insight, it's not as simple as comparing like with like. So hopefully that's clarified the piece around the existing customer base we have. As I said, it's significant, so we've got a platform to build on in terms of customers that we can engage with. So a very different proposition to the introduction of the service and tendering.
Thank you. Right, Councillor Barber, anything else before I have my go?
No, I think my questions on the economic side of it and modelling in given the economic impact haven't really been answered. That's all.
Okay, I don't know whether Mr. Dorr wants to add anything to what you've said, given that comment, Mr. Dorr. You don't have to, but it's entirely up to you.
So we haven't undertaken a specific modelling exercise of the impact of the global pandemic at the moment. As I said, the insight that we're gaining from other authorities at the moment is that levels of interest in their service has actually increased at the moment.
Okay, thank you. I've just got 4 very quick questions. I'll ask them as questions on this because I'm conscious of the hour. In this, the costs around the gardening club. Now, I do see in 9.12 we've got recurring costs, expenditure, and part of that is customer contact center administration processing. printed communications. I can't get a sense of what the gardening club is going to cost. So that's the first question, because obviously it sounds like it's a full-time job running this club, certainly for someone to do. So just would be interested if you could unpick some of those figures for me. You talked about speaking to Essex County Council. That's why I declared my interest earlier, although I haven't been part of this conversation at all. I just wondered, in that conversation, what evidence do you think, and do they think, about the extra tonnage that will go to Shrub-End as a result of this? And what proportion do you believe, through evidence, will go into Black Sacks? Now, the evidence, of course, you can gather from other authorities. There was a comment, I think Councillor Goss made that, which was, you mentioned that in some areas, I think Old Heath Road was the example, there are some houses not suitable for wheelie bins. I guess my question is, who gets to make that decision? Last time, every single borough councillor was asked their opinion. Would you intend to do that here as well? Because obviously local knowledge is very good. I mean, councillors will know their patches. And I just want to pick up on a theme from our first member contribution from Councillor Leslie Scott-Butell. A kind of question to say, would you, because I'm conscious you have clearly said, Councillor Goss, that you really don't want to do this, it's with a heavy heart you're saying you're doing this. But if there was a chance to pause this tomorrow night and then to rethink using the pre-scrutiny process, would that be acceptable to you as you currently sit to ease your heartache and also perhaps get us through a financial issue as well? So they're my 4 questions. Take those as you wish. I'll start with you, Councillor Goss.
Great questions, quite succinct, Kevin, so thank you. The costs of the garden club, I'll let Rory or Rosa give you a bit more detail on that, but it is not meant to be a huge spray cost to the council. But I'll let Rory explain a bit more. Essex County Council, again, Rory and Rosa have had those conversations directly, and it does give some figures in the paper, which I know you've read, Kevin, where I know it has put some percentages as to where it thinks other waste could go in a worst case scenario. But at the same time, as I've also clearly said, if people start trying to shove this stuff in plastic, into black sacks or bins, of course, the waste crew are clever folks, been doing the job a long time. People try and do it now. And obviously that gets stickered and doesn't get removed because obviously it's not meant to go in there. In terms of wheelie bins, absolutely local knowledge is king, and I've already said that earlier. So happy to obviously take any input. Obviously the officers will have an idea as to where bins are not suitable. I've certainly got a good idea of Colchester and where bins are not suitable, but local knowledge is very helpful. So input is welcome, and obviously we'll, if this goes ahead, of course, we'll try and be as understanding as possible. Obviously, we know it's between 4,000 and 6,000 houses that are probably not suitable based on previous experience. And then decision from scrutiny. Well, you already know I'm not happy with this. I'm not happy to add a charge to residents, to my family, to you, etc. I've always been honest about that. But tough times mean we have to, look at to other decisions. So I'm looking forward to seeing what the scrutiny team come up with tonight and feedback, because that's the whole point of us bringing it here and spending, nearly 3 hours discussing it. I think it's important. And if time for pause and reflection is what you ask us to do, we should take on board everything you feed in and take that forwards, because that's the whole point of scrutiny. What is the point in hosting a meeting?
Yes. I understand. I think my question was, if one of our recommendations was for you or the cabinet to pause this for a rethink, would you find that acceptable, was my question.
Yes, absolutely.
Right. It's very clear.
Rory, I'll bring the other
Yep.
points that I didn't cover in detail.
So I'll bring in my colleague Rosa in a moment, because Rosa's been having the conversations from a pan-Essex perspective, and that includes the conversations we've been having with colleagues from Essex County Council, both in terms of volumes and the experiences from other authorities who've implemented these schemes. So I'll bring Rosa in a moment. Just on the point of the garden club, as Councillor Goss has set out, in the main, there's not considered to be significant amount of cost involved on this, because we're taking very much an asset-based approach, looking at our existing resources, both in terms of the officers we have available, their skills and talents in terms of our parks officers and our ranger service, and also our community enabling team, and the connection of community groups who are activated on this sort of thing. There is a small cost built into the comms, the wider comms, which will of course the kind of marketing of the garden club will be a key part of that. So those costs are built into the business case. I'll bring Rosa in, if that's okay, on the point in terms of our liaison with County Council, Chair.
Thank you.
Hello. So in discussing these proposals with Essex County Council, and as Rory said, speaking to other councils as well, there isn't a particular deep concern with officers that I've been talking to that we're going to see a significant increase in tonnage at the recycling centre, because that correlates to their experience where it's been introduced in other areas where there's been a chargeable service. But as Rory has said, the pre-chargeable service has been slightly different for each of those district councils. But as I said, the concern, there isn't a significant concern that there will be an increase in those locations.
We share that view then. We have no concern that there'll be an increase in tonnage at Shrub End as a result of this move. That's the administration's view, is it?
Yes.
Yes, thank you. Right, that's good. Thank you very much indeed. Right, okay. Now, I'm conscious of the hour. I'm going to go around my colleagues again to see if they have any follow-up questions. May I just put a polite plea out that we don't have lots of comments, we just have direct questions, please. But I've got Owen just indicating at the moment.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, to interrupt. I just noted that Councillor King has had his hand raised for a while, and I just wanted to check. Yes.
Okay, I beg your pardon. I'm not monitoring that bit, so I didn't see, but thank you. Councillor King, come in now before I go back to our colleagues.
Thank you very much indeed, Chair. It's worth the wait, perhaps. I just wanted to ask one thing of scrutiny colleagues, beyond wanting to reinforce what Councillor Goss has said, that willingness to pause. But it's the context. Several members, and most recently Councillor Barber, and I don't pick you out Lewis for any reason, it's just this is all complicated, you understand it better than many will, about the budget. The budget is not balanced by us agreeing or not agreeing. Clearly, if we don't agree, if we agree garden waste charges or its equivalent, which will be a very significant, a referendum requiring council tax increase of circa 20%. That's the kind of thing you have to do to raise $1 million or so. The gap is not filled, the budget is not balanced. There is no prospect of material money, we think, from government in this financial year. There's no promise for future years. This is not me being political. My duty, and I believe all our duty, is to be sort of cool on the facts. And the facts are we've had fantastic help. The whole economic position, in my view, couldn't fault what government's done. I don't. But they are giving us a haircut like they are many others. And it's going to be hugely difficult, not just for Colchester, but for every local authority, but particularly for those who raise income, as we do as a low tax authority. So the challenge we face is not just mine on your behalf, it's yours as well. That conversation is one we need. A reminder of those numbers, 3 million to 6 or 7 a year for the next 4 years is the kind of thing we've got to bite off. It will require all of the things I've said and we put to scrutiny in June. Raise money, somehow, significantly, 2 choices, council tax, in my view, or garden waste. There's no other easy alternatives. We'll be looking through those as we go. Efficiencies and frankly, job cuts. And a reminder, make it personal when we know how difficult it is for people. Every million we try and save is equivalent to 30 jobs or so in the council. You and I, we care about our officers and the service they provide. So I just want to make sure we understand the reason why we've gone at pace and why I have driven this, and poor Martin Goss, is because the numbers are dreadful and it's our duty collectively to find a way through them. I recommend that Scrutiny work with the administration on this. That, in my view, Chair, is the best way for this to be done. I don't think it's done easily in the council chamber with a motion as a sort of revolver to your head. I think it's best done in the quasi apolitical nature of Scrutiny. I support that process, but please, whatever we think about garden waste, do not lose sight of that wider responsibility. Thank you.
Thank you. Points well made. Of course, it is the administration's job to get through a balanced budget, but I take the point very seriously. And as Councillor Goss said at the beginning, you can't just oppose something for the sake of it. So pre-scrutiny, I think, would play a very important part in this. I just have a feeling that we've pulled up a couple of things, quite substantial things in the report that need to be changed. It's already published, actually, that would need to be changed. And I think there's a bit of haste here. So I understand you've gone at haste. And I think there's reasons why we need to just take a pause and look at this, other than just the principal reason. But I take your comments on board. If we are going to suggest a pause, then I think pre-scrutiny plays a very large part in the future of what we're going to try and achieve. Right, okay, I'm going to go around the same order again. Please, colleagues, if I could just ask for questions this time, not comments, because it is 9 o'clock. Right, Councillor Bourne.
Thank you, Chair. I have no questions, but I do have some recommendations that I've picked up.
Lovely. We'll come to
those on the second round through. Yes.
We'll come to those when we come to recommendations, which after I've just done this. Yeah. Thank you for that. Okay, Councillor Heater.
No, nothing from me. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor McCarthy.
Thank you very much, Chair. Just a quick one for Councillor King. Can you just remind me the numbers that the government will be failing to deliver on in terms of money that we were promised or that they have backtracked on?
Yeah, I could. Think of the gap, that £6 million gap. That is the difference between income costs and what we're getting from government. But it's a year-on-year issue. That's the point. You're reminding me, and I've reminded others, it's each year we will have a differential. So 17 to 20 million or so in the next 4 years beyond this year. Large numbers relative to our 20 million a year budget. Thank you.
It's probably worth just saying, as we know at the moment, though, because...
Absolutely, and I've been fair-minded about this. It may change. I'd expect, so to the point, Chair, I expect that in the annual settlement round, there will be another look at this. But if anybody thinks that we will not have a haircut reflecting the challenges of today, then, as I say, we can only go with what we know.
No, I understand. I just want to
make is what there is at the moment.
I understand, absolutely. It's absolutely right. Thank you, Councillor Whitehead.
No further questions from me.
Thank you very much indeed. Let me then go to Councillor Barber.
Oh, no. Oh, I'm good for now. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hogg.
No more questions, Chairman.
Thank you. And Councillor Dundas.
Thank you, Chair. Just one question, really. It's just really to try and sum up the point I was trying to make earlier and really why I was making it. And for clarity, and I think it's important the Cabinet understand this. Rory has stated that the break-even point is 25% take-up. That's what he said earlier. The tendering take-up we've established is about 25%. The risk is, if our take-up on taking those two things at face value, as I understand it, this is what I'm asking for clarity on, if our take-up was the same as tendering, we as a council would have introduced a very unpopular charge for absolutely no financial benefit at all to the council. Is that how I understand it? And is that the risk the Cabinet need to understand?
I can reply for us and say it's well put. I heard that as well. I also heard some confidence based upon experience more widely that take up as predicted has been widely found to be true elsewhere. But you're right, as I hear it. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, colleagues, I think we should get to the stage of recommendations now. I know Councillor Bourne has one. I certainly have. I've been jotting some things down here, given the answers to questions. I've written something, but Councillor Bourne, let's hear from you first.
Thank you, Chair. Can I congratulate you for chairing tonight's meeting in a fair manner? Thank you. My recommendations are, a pause on the proposal to introduce changes to the garden waste collection services. Further exploration of the 5-point response to budget recovery agreed at June scrutiny meeting, including forensic understanding of statutory and non-statutory services provided by CBC. The setup of a task and finish group that reviews waste service costs and implications that must meet swiftly and has to be cross-party. Now, we talk about task and finish groups quite often, Chair, that have that don't have all representatives on. I think it's important to have Councillor Goetcher as the Green Councillor and someone from the Highwoods Independents as well, and continues to lobby central government for a long-term financial settlement for the benefit of this council's finances and its residents.
Golly, that's almost word for word what I've written. All I would add to it is actually about just consulting all members in their wards on where wheelie bins can and can't go, because I think that would just be important. That's the only thing I had additional to that. So that is fantastic. Okay, are there any other proposals for recommendations other than what you've just heard? And I'll put my bit in about consulting all members. Are people content with that, if we were to add that on?
Content, Chairman.
Yeah, good, lovely, thank you. Right, in which case, I think we can go to a vote on this now. So could you just, for the sake of clarity, Owen, have you got all that down? I'm conscious you were, that's being read out, that down. If not, I'll ask Councillor Bourne just to run through it again with my addition. And then I think we'll ask Councillor Bourne, if you wouldn't mind, just to tap it out and send it to you, if that's okay. It's a bit different than sitting in the town hall doing this, isn't it? Councillor Bourne, could you just run through that again for us, just so everyone's got it?
A pause on the proposal to introduce changes to the garden waste collection services. Further exploration of the 5-point response to budget recovery agreed at June scrutiny meeting, including forensic understanding of statutory and non-statutory services provided by CBC, setting up of a task and finish group that reviews waste service costs and implications, and continue to lobby central government for a long-term financial settlement for the benefit of this council's finances and its residents.
Thank you. And with my addition that all members are consulted on the future placing of wheelie bins. Okay. So on that basis, I'm going to go to the vote and go through each councillor, and we'll just change it around again slightly. So Councillor Dundas.
Sorry, Chair, I'd lost my mute button. 4.
Thank you. Councillor Barber.
4.
Thank you. Councillor Heater.
4.
Thank you. Councillor Bourne.
4.
Thank you. Councillor Whitehead.
4.
Councillor Hogg.
4, Chairman, but does the councillor need a seconder for that recommendation? Or
I don't think so here, because it's not a motion, it's recommendations. But thank you.
Thank you for that. It's 4 anyway.
I will just double check, because I made a big assumption. I think I'm right though, Owen, is that right?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, no seconding needed.
Thank you very much. Good prompt though, Mike. Councillor McCarthy.
4.
Thank you. I'm a 4 as well. I think that's unanimous. Can I just check with Owen, please?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, unanimous vote for the motion, for the recommendations.
So, colleagues, what I will do tomorrow is attend Cabinet in my role as Chair of Scrutiny to present that and the reasons behind it, because I think that's very important, rather than just sending it as a written document. Although we have the leader and various officers and Cabinet members here, I think it's important that the Chair does that on your behalf at Cabinet. So, leader and Cabinet members expect me to pop up tomorrow and just present that back again. Can I say thank you to everyone? That's quite a long scrutiny meeting on one subject. We're not quite finished yet, so before I do my final goodbyes and thank yous, we do have item 12, the work programme. Now, we did go through this, I think it felt like 3 weeks ago. My proposal is we just note it for now and not add anything to it. Does anyone violently object to that view?
Agreed.
Agreed, Chair, but I just want to propose one more thing, if I may.
Yes.
I would just like to propose, actually, from the panel, a vote of thanks to former Councillor Beverly Davis for her chairmanship of the panel for some years. I think she did a very good job and was well respected in that role.
Yes, I think that's good and absolutely right. And I know we've all sent her our private good wishes, but that's a very good record.
I agree with that, Chairman. I did send my personal thanks to Beverly, but I also agree with Councillor Dundas' remarks.
Could we just record that in the minutes, please, Owen, if that's all right, that we've done that?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, so recorded.
Good, thank you. On the basis that we have done item 12, I think that then completes the meeting for tonight. Can I just say to everyone, thank you very much, the officers particularly who've given up their time to be here, especially our Democratic Services colleagues who've worked very hard to make this meeting work very well. Thank you to all the councillors who've attended. Thank you, and to all the panel members who've attended. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Chairman.
I will be at Scrutiny. I'll be at Cabinet tomorrow. Good night.
Well done. Good night, good people.